All right. Good morning, everybody. I've got 9:02 a.m. Central Standard Time. Welcome to the EHS Academy. This is the 25th offering of this course, and this is considered part 2 of our virtual offering. I know many of you participated in part 1, but this is considered part 2. We'll explain exactly what that means in a few moments. But I'm going to kick this over to our colleagues within the UT School of Public Health, specifically the Southwest Center for Occupational Environmental Health, to go over a few logistics to get us kicked off here today.
Hello, welcome everyone. My name is Serena, and I also would like to welcome everyone to our part 2 of our Environmental and Safety Academy. This is day 1 of our 3-day training session. So we will be here from 9 to 1 p.m. Central Standard Time. We will have our introductions, then we will go into risk management and insurance basics. Then we will have a 15-minute break. Then we will turn with fire and life safety and occupational safety basics. A little bit about the Southwest Center. We are based out of University of Texas Health Sciences Center in Houston, Texas. We do training and continuing education around environmental and occupational health. We have training programs, we have outreach and continuing education, and we have a research and practice branch. If you have any training needs, have any continuing education issues, please visit at our website, swcoeh.org. There we have a list of past and upcoming trainings. And if your organization has any training needs, we would love to help you. So you could drop us a line if you have any questions. You can also visit us on social media. We are at Facebook, we have a Twitter, and we are also at LinkedIn at SWCOEH. We will hand it over back to our safety team.
All right. Thank you very much, Serena, and good morning again, everybody. My name is Scott Patlovich. I help to run the day-to-day operations of our health and safety program here at the University of Texas Health Science Center. So for those of you who don't know us, we help to oversee the teaching, research, and clinical activities on our campus, which is interspersed within the Texas Medical Center, the world's largest medical center. So we're in a densely urban area. We've got 6 schools under our umbrella, including the McGovern Medical School, the Cedric School of Nursing. We've got a School of Dentistry, School of Public Health, Bioinformatics, and Biomedical Sciences. And roughly speaking, we have about 18,000 people on our campus between our employees, our students, our medical residents, and when you add in our visitors and our contractors and our patients, we've got well over that number. And we've got over 5 million square feet of space that we help to oversee in terms of safety. My partner in crime, Safety Bob, I'm going to kick this over to him now to give us a quick background and introduction to the course, and then I'll talk through a few more logistics before we get kicked off with the topics.
Well, good morning, howdy from Texas. My name's Bob Emery. Everybody knows me as Safety Bob. I'm even getting chats already about Safety Bob. So I'm the founding father of this EHS Academy. I guess I'm like George Washington or something. I'm not sure, but 25 years ago, it dawned on me and some research projects that we've done here at the university that no one was really ever oriented on how universities work, and first, if somebody could understand, or if someone had explained to me 40 years ago how universities operate, I would have less gray hair and more hair than I do now. So we created this class. We actually got a grant through NIOSH and created this class, and now we're in our 25th year. It's been highly successful. We've had people from around the country. Of course, like everyone that's on this connection here, we've had to pivot because of the COVID environment, but I can promise you we are pivoting back. We are going back to in-person. For 20 years or so, we had humans that would come here from literally around the world, come to this building and spend the week. And I would argue that half of the learning occurred just through the interactions of the people meeting together face to face, sharing business cards, sharing more stories, and we're going to go back to that. But nonetheless, all of us have had to adapt in this environment. You may ask yourself, why does this class have Roman numerals after it? And it's because with the classroom that we use is actually in the shadow of the Astrodome. So where we sit right now, World Safety Headquarters, is literally in the shadow of both the Astrodome and the new stadium, NRG Stadium. And this numbering was to acknowledge that several Super Bowls have been played here in Houston. But Scott brought up a good point that we're now at XXV, and not exactly sure how it's going to happen when we get to year 30 here, because I don't know if that'll be the most popular class or there could be some other issues. I'm not sure. I'll let you fill in the blanks there on that. So this hybrid environment that we've got right now, we've got all practicing professionals. They're all in the trenches doing this stuff. So I would encourage you to challenge them and ask questions about real world practicalities. One of the things a couple of things that's kind of put us on the radar screen. One of them is all of us in our business, on a good day, nothing happens, right? We function in the realm of prevention. And so I'm very intrigued by that. And so we've undertaken a series of elaborate benchmarking projects to find out statistically what is it that drives health and safety resourcing and staffing for university environments. And we've published a bunch of papers on this and things like that. So we will weave that sort of information into what we're going to cover on this one here. The other thing I guess I would like to underscore, and I'll turn it back to Scott, is that we really see this class as the start of a relationship. And what I mean by that, and that's why the in-person meeting was so important, because I can't tell you how many people we've had thousands of people through this class over the quarter of a century. And it's when after you meet these people and then they go back and then they call and they ask about stuff or they compare notes, and it's been a very enriching experience to do it that way. So please think of this as more of a collegial discussion and the start of a professional relationship that we can maintain going forward. So again, welcome to the class. I wish you were all here in person. We would take you out while you're here. Anytime we have class here, the food pyramid in Houston, Texas is very narrow. It's either barbecue, fajitas, or like, I don't know, right now it's what you call it, crawfish season. So that'd be pretty much it. So again, welcome. I'll kick it back to Scott.
Thanks so much, Safety Bob. And again, I'd like to just underscore the welcome. And I do look forward to the future in-person courses, but nonetheless, we have persevered through the COVID-19 situation by offering this course virtually. And let me just explain this format for those of you who might not be familiar with this two-part series that we put together, out of necessity, by the way, because of the pandemic. We decided that given the length of the course, which is normally in person over the course of 5 days, there's no way that all of us could persevere doing this virtually in that same format. And so we broke this course into two parts. Part one, which we conducted exactly a year ago, covered the quote unquote soft science topics that we always include in this course curriculum. So let me just recap what those soft science topics are. Safety Bob has literally a world famous presentation on how universities work. And so that presentation is very powerful because none of us ever imagined that we'd be working necessarily in the university environment, or at least very few of us aspire to work in this environment. But when you get here, although most of us have been through an undergraduate program and curriculum in a college or university setting, getting training on how universities really work and operate is not something that is traditionally taught, especially to health and safety professionals. So if you're going to be operating in this setting, that's just such a powerful presentation. In part one, we also cover what we call the 50 questions. These are questions that we put together many years ago to set the expectation for our health and safety professional staff within our own organization to understand the core concepts in the various different disciplines that we would expect for our health and safety professionals. So rather than hiring somebody into our program and expecting them to specialize and perhaps even silo into a chemical safety role, we expect them to understand the basics of fire and life safety, biological safety, radiation safety, the hazardous waste management side of things, so that they are as powerful as possible when they go out and do their job each and every day across our laboratories, our clinics, in our buildings on our campus. And so those 50 questions serve to codify the knowledge expectation for our staff. And so sharing that as part of this course is really laid the groundwork for learning for not only our staff, but for the participants of this course. And then we design each of the topics throughout the course to serve those 50 questions. By the way, if anybody wants a copy of those 50 questions who do not participate in part one of this EHS Academy, we are absolutely going to share that on our Canvas website. We also talk about client satisfaction and methods for evaluating how your health and safety program is performing based on feedback from those who we serve. We talk about measures, metrics, benchmarking through the part one series as well. And then we showcase an annual report that we cover, that we create for our institution and our health and safety program as kind of the culmination of the collection of the day-to-day activities, which roll into monthly activity reports, which then ultimately roll into an annual report for our health and safety program. So really showcasing how we communicate what it is that we do each and every day in our safety programs was the focus of that effort there. So that, in brief, summarizes what we covered in part one. Those soft sciences are all very important, but just to be clear, we are not going to include those topics in part two. So here's what we're going to do over the course of the next 3 weeks as part of this course. We have the quote-unquote hard science topics that we're going to cover during part two of this EHS Academy. Starting today, we're going to cover the basics of risk management and insurance. So Bryan Evans, I don't know if you want to take a quick wave. Bryan's going to introduce himself a little later and cover the risk management and insurance basics, things that are important for health and safety professionals to understand. And then we'll kick it over to Snehal Rana and his team. So Snehal's waving right now to talk about both fire and life safety basics and then occupational safety basics. Each one of our sessions, by the way, as I just sidebar here for a second, each one of our sessions is going to be a presentation, live presentation here today. Go ahead and throw in your questions, comments, discussion throughout the presentation in the chat box. I'll be monitoring that. And then at the end of the session, we're going to leave 5 to 10 minutes for discussion with our subject matter experts so that we can have a dialogue here. Again, this isn't going to be quite the same as being in person, but we want to make this as effective as possible. So we need your participation, either through putting information into the chat box, or if you want to save your comments or questions until the end, you can come off mute and have a discussion at the end. That dialogue is going to be really important for everyone as part of the learning experience and networking experience, as Safety Bob mentioned. Next week, we have additional subject matter experts who will be presenting additional topics in these so-called hard science areas: chemical safety basics, occupational health programs, and hazardous waste management basics. And then week 3 will be biological safety basics. We'll go over basic ergonomic assessments, and then we'll conclude with radiation safety basics to hit the whole spectrum of the core basic disciplines within the health and safety field that we encounter here in the university setting. What we're going to do in terms of format is, because we have a somewhat limited time to present each of these topics in this live virtual format, and to prevent everybody from getting piles from sitting for too long, we have broken out additional content for you in an asynchronous format. So you all have access to the Canvas website, and we will be posting the live virtual presentations as well as additional asynchronous content. Your homework assignment will be to go through that asynchronous content each week at your own pace, to go through the material and learn about the additional information about those different topics. If you have questions, discussion items during the week as you're going through that asynchronous content, we would encourage you to go to the Canvas website and put in your feedback into the system so that others can chime in. And we'll be monitoring that discussion as well and providing feedback. Then next week, when we get together virtually here, we're going to spend the first 15 minutes of that session with our subject matter experts from the previous week. So let's just rerun that format. We're going to have live virtual presentations today from Bryan and Snehal and team that cover risk management and insurance, fire and life safety, and occupational safety basics. Then you're going to be left with some asynchronous content on the Canvas sites in those various topic areas that you can review on your own time. And if you have questions or discussion items, any feedback, please put it on the Canvas site. We'll be monitoring and chatting about that. And then when we huddle next week on Monday, the first 15 minutes will be dedicated just for Bryan and Snehal to be present to discuss any other aspects of these various different topics that they're presenting on today. And if you have any discussion items or questions about the asynchronous content, in addition to what's already been posted on the Canvas site, we can have additional conversation with our subject matter experts. So Bryan and Snehal will be here for the first 15 minutes at least next week as well. Okay, does that all sound reasonable to everybody? Again, we would encourage you to participate during these live virtual sessions by adding your questions and feedback into the chat box, and I'll be monitoring that. And then at the end of each presentation, we'll spend a few minutes coming off mute and having additional discussion. I hope you enjoy this format, right? And I'm going to now kick this over to Bryan Evans to get started on our risk management and insurance basics section. Bryan, it's all yours.
All right, thanks, Scott. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the EHS Academy. Share my screen. Hopefully you guys can see that. Good, okay. All right, a quick bio about me. I've been with UT Health for 12 years in the risk management and emergency management role. I graduated from the University of Houston in 1995 with my bachelor's, and a quick short 20 years later, got my MBA from also University of Houston, and some other designations I've acquired along the way. I have an ARM, which stands for Associate in Risk Management, an MAC, stands for Mold Assessment Consultant, and then I am also trained in water restoration and fire and smoke restoration. Before UT Health, I've had previous jobs in the restoration business with a company called Blackman Mooring, and also in the insurance business with Farmers Insurance. Okay, so all right, so yeah, this is risk management and insurance basics and how it relates to an EHS department. And yeah, it's kind of cliche to start with a definition, but I'm going to start with a definition. So risk management is the process of making and implementing decisions that will minimize the adverse effects of accidental and business losses on an organization. Which brings up the question, where is risk management? Sometimes it's in the legal department. Sometimes it's in HR. And then, here at UT Health, it is in the safety department, which we feel is a great place for it. It ensures good communication because risk management is most of the time over workers' comp. And it's important to know for the safety department, what injuries are happening and where. I know of a university down the road from us that their risk management and workers' comp doesn't communicate with the safety department at all. So their safety department has no idea how many slip and falls are happening and where they're happening. So they have no idea of how to prevent those. What does the risk manager do? You definitely do not let your employees do things like this. And here's another good quote that I found. A risk manager's job is to figuratively sit on a hill look down at the company, visualize all activities, and try to think about what could go wrong and what to do about it. So throughout the years, risk management has pretty much been thought of as just insurance. But in reality, it's a much broader range of issues and solutions. There's disaster planning, emergency management. One of the big roles that I have is dealing with continuous water damages and occasional fire and mold damages. Risk management is also business continuity and mitigation. So typical risk management program objectives, you're going to be looking to minimize exposure to financial losses, protecting your physical assets, and of course, providing for a safe environment for your employees. You want to reduce frequency and severity of accidents. And that's two words you're going to hear quite a bit in this presentation is frequency and severity. All risk managers use those to analyze their different exposures and then what to do about them. You also want to minimize your interruptions of service provided to your various clients. So what does risk manager do specifically? Risk assessments is a big part of it. And then here's 3 issues that came up in the last few years. Having drones on campus was a new one to us. And then all of a sudden we have drone insurance. When that came to us, we had to do some Google searches and just see what the incident rate is with drones and what damage can they do, what damage have they done, how often does that happen, and how severe it is. And lo and behold, we did have a drone accident at the UT Austin campus where a drone crashed into a hydraulic fluid pit, caused a pretty big fire. And I guess with hydraulic fluid, it's very difficult to put out. So that fire kind of lasted a while. Also, food trucks, and would we allow them on campus? For many years, the city of Houston did not allow food trucks in 2 different places. One was downtown Houston, and the other was in the medical center in Houston. But as food trucks have gotten safer, we now allow them in and around our campus, and they're also allowed in downtown Houston. And then guns on campus came about, I guess, 4 or 5 years ago when the Texas legislature passed some legislation saying that you pretty much have to allow guns on campus. You can outlaw them in certain areas, but it can't be 100%. And I'm not going to go into detail about that, but that was kind of a big issue at the time. So also what risk managers do, loss prevention is a big part of it. And then travel. Being at a university that does quite a bit of research, it's not uncommon to have your professors and your students at just different countries all over the world. And you can just imagine some of the risks that brings up. And that's always the thing, when a country, one example I can think of is, Egypt a few years ago had a big riot, uprising, whatever you want to call it. And the first question obviously is, well, what personnel do we have in Egypt, and then what can we do about it? Claims management is a big one. Workers' comp, we average probably 6 to 7 injuries a week, which sounds like a lot, but just keep in mind we run a psychiatric hospital. So probably 40-50% of our claims come from the psychiatric hospital. And then, as you can imagine, auto claims, an occasional fire will happen. Also, contract review. Our legal department reaches out to me quite a bit to look at the insurance clauses and different contracts that come up from time to time. Risk financing strategies, insurance placement, and then about once a year, sometimes twice a year, we have a site inspection from our insurance broker that wants to to see the different buildings. Typically, it's about 1/3 of our buildings get looked at every year. And then insurance cost allocation. Obviously you don't, it's not all equal is what I'm trying to get at. So when it comes to the cost allocation, some departments for insurance cost more than others, and that's part of a risk manager's job, is how you charge each department in a fair way. Okay, so you can break risk management down into two components. Number one, risk financing is the process of obtaining funds to pay for or offset losses. This is traditionally what is thought of as risk management, or generally considered insurance. And then a big part of it also is risk control. It's the process to minimize the frequency and or severity of accidental losses. And this includes the conventional functions of a safety program. Risk management involves a 5-step process, and we're going to go through these a little bit. So yeah, step one is risk identification. What risks are present in your organization? How might we go about making this list? And here's a great, I love this picture. Especially I like doing this presentation in front of people because you get some interesting answers about this. So what's the greatest risk here? A lot of times I would get, obviously this guy's got his hands in a biohazard bag, maybe a bag of needles. God, she's pouring some liquid, definitely needs eye protection. And I would say both of them do. Gloves. So the PPE is just way off. And then being a Texans fan is a big risk, risk of heart attack or high blood pressure. But no, your upper management, the way they might think about this, or the risk manager might think, the biggest risk here is sexual harassment. And the reason he or she might say that is because the lawsuit, the numbers behind that lawsuit might be greater than a workers' comp injury for a needle stick or an eye splash. So anyway, just a different way of thinking about that. So typical risk at your place might be obviously the building structures and contents, employees, visitors, the automobile, trucks and fleet, which, just right off the bat, we probably average 5 or 6 auto claims a year here. Sexual harassment, discrimination, theft, and then a big one lately is the theft of your technology or your intellectual property. Drinking, drug abuse, medical malpractice is always a big one in a medical institution, and biomedical research involving humans or animals. One good example of this is that a few years back, we discovered that we had a member of the PETA organization who had kind of infiltrated our organization and was employed by us. No incident happened, but obviously that could have happened. Something bad could have happened at that point. Okay, so step one, you want to identify your exposures. What types of exposures do you have? Obviously your property, exposure to your net income, liability, and personnel. And what methods would you use to find your exposures? To me, the best one, when I first started here, was looking at the past records and files. And it was just pretty obvious, the number one cause of loss was water damage. And that continues to this day, 12 years later. We probably average about 15 to 20 water damages a year. Most are small, but occasionally you get a fairly large one where you need outside help to clean it up. Other ways to identify your exposures, surveys are great. Questionnaires, send out to the people. Let them tell you what has happened in the past and maybe what they think some of the biggest risks are here. Looking at financial statements, Losses do have a financial impact. Some are huge. You know, like Hurricane Harvey for us was a $4 million claim. Another way is just to get out on campus and look around. You do personal inspections. And then a great way, if you have the money, is to hire consultants to help you with that. And then you want to analyze your exposures. What impacts can they have? You know, obviously your profit. It could be a hit to your continuous operation. It could definitely limit the growth of your organization. There could be humanitarian concerns or legal requirements. And then, as I mentioned earlier, what is the frequency of these types of losses and what is the severity? And then there's 3 dimensions of a loss exposure. You've got the value exposed to loss, property. Obviously, tangible losses, it's easy to think about, to put your finger on, but intangible losses are very difficult. They're hard to value. We had a big loss here of intangible property. It was, I think total was probably 3 to 5 years of research was lost with a computer failure. And it took a couple months to put a value on it, because that researcher had to go back and look at how much labor was involved. And that was the big thing is looking at the labor. I mean, there's definitely some hard costs with the materials used for that research, but the biggest thing was labor. And it ended up being a substantial loss. It was over 400 grand. So net income, you can definitely have a hit to your net income where you have a decrease in revenue after a loss, or obviously an increase in your expenses. Liability issues can come up, and then personnel losses. You never want to see that. But also, what's the peril causing the loss? Is it natural? Is it man-made? Natural ones are ones we all think about: windstorms, hail, flood, and fire. And then the third dimension, what's the financial consequences of the loss? What's the frequency and severity of the occurrence? One rule of thumb is that typically the more severe, the less frequent that it happens. So the second step is to look at your risk management alternatives. You can look at doing a risk control or a risk financing method. So risk control, you can find a way to just avoid the exposure altogether, or to reduce that loss. Some companies will separate their exposures, especially large companies. One that comes to mind is Toyota, where they have different manufacturing plants in different parts of the world. So if one plant goes down, they can easily start up that other plant, so they're not totally out of business. Risk financing, you can retain your losses, so you can just expense your losses as they come up through maybe an unfunded reserve or a funded reserve, which for a few years we actually had a funded reserve. With my detailed spreadsheets showing every single loss that's happened, we were able to determine what our average retained losses were for each year. So our facilities department, who basically pays most of these retained losses, they actually set up a funded reserve, and it was working pretty well until, of course, Hurricane Harvey hit, and that, of course, blew out their funded reserve. You can also borrow funds when losses happen, and then transfer that risk to commercial insurance, or you may have another company where you have a contractual transfer of the risk to them. That's not very common, but it does happen. So just an example. Let's say you need a car. What are the risk control options? Well, for exposure avoidance, you just wouldn't buy a car. You take the bus instead. For loss prevention, you wouldn't drive at all, not much, or just very, very carefully. Loss reduction, get a less expensive car to make the losses smaller. And separation duplication, you would own 2 or more cars and park in different locations. And then a contractual transfer, you would lease a car. Now your risk financing options. So retention, you would just pay for damage from income. Retention through unfunded reserves, you would just recognize the need to pay for damages if it occurs. And as I mentioned, the retention through funded reserves, you would just set aside funds each year to pay for your damages that come up. Retention through borrowing, you would just use a loan or credit card to pay for the damages. Through a captive insurer, you would form or join a captive. Yeah. In this example, it'd probably be something like you would carpool each day. So that would lower each person's risk. And then contractual transfer, you would find a non-insurance indemnitor to pay for damages, and commercial insurance, as we all know, you would be purchasing auto insurance. Okay, so just a few examples of risk controls. Some of the big ones that you might have at your place: firewalls, pretty much everywhere, sprinklers, smoke alarms, using non-slip floors and non-slip shoes, making those mandatory for your people that work in wet areas. One that came up a few years ago is we were having some slip and falls at the entrances to certain buildings. So we procured those umbrella bags. If you don't have those, I highly recommend those. Those are great. They save a lot of slip and falls, and it just keeps the floors at the main entrances nice and dry. And then kind of my pet project for the last few years is trying to get our facilities department to install these water leak detectors in our mechanical rooms. Most of our water damages are fairly small, but the ones that happen in the mechanical rooms are generally pretty big. I mean, over 50 grand. And we've even had one. We had one on a holiday weekend. I think it was July 4th weekend a few years back, where a pipe broke in the mechanical room, and it ran for 3 days straight. So that was a loss way over 200 grand. But these water leak detectors would have helped. May not have been, there still would have been a loss, but it would have been a lot smaller. These are the type of water leak detectors that it's not just a local alarm. These actually call and text people that something's happening. So someone could have got to that building and shut the water off. Okay, so types of insurance and coverages, some of the basic ones: you have commercial property, boiler, machinery, crime, general liability, business auto, workers' comp, D&O, which is directors and officers, and then employment practices liability, which I have at the end of this presentation, I have a graph showing how big or small each premium is of those. Okay, the third step is selecting the best alternative. How would you go about that? You would look at financial criteria. There's a lot of other criteria to look at. What's best for your people, what's best for the bottom line, and then applying that criteria through risk control, risk financing. The fourth step is how to implement. When to implement is a big part of it too. You do it over the summer when not many students are around. Do you do it during the holidays when no one's around? And definitely you have to think about communication. For example, you can't just go self-insured on a policy without letting a lot of people know, and of course letting them know why you would do that. You must have buy-in from your upper management for that. And then the fifth step, you of course want to monitor your implementation, ensure that it was properly implemented, and just look for any changes that need to be made, any kind of adjustments through your insurance broker or insurance company. And then what would you look at? Would you monitor the OSHA 300 log? Your insurance costs? How did this decision affect your annual losses? Were there any complaints? Service? And then your cost of program. And the cost of program, it's sometimes people think it's just your premiums for this, but there's a lot more to it. It's the cost that you used to put into place different controls. And then you also have to add in the losses as well to get an idea of just the total cost of that program. And then compliance issues that come up from time to time. So some common risk management critiques of a health and safety program. A risk manager might say that the safety program doesn't consider the big picture. They don't look at the business perspective, or that they always rush to measure when they should just try a simple fix first. Sometimes rushing to the few highly exposed when the larger group of minimally exposed might be a bigger return on investment. Utilization of insurer services, which is one that comes up from time to time. These insurance brokers that we have do provide quite a bit of services. You just have to know when to ask and what to ask for, and basically read their contract, what they do provide, what they don't provide. Another one is, what is the frequency and severity of the loss exposure? Is it imminent or is it hypothetical? For example, I was told we were leasing a suite from a company. This company just took over Memorial Hermann's property management, and they're out of California. And they were literally requiring us to have earthquake insurance. And they were literally requiring us to have sprinkler head insurance, when we don't own the sprinkler head. We're leasing the space. We don't own the sprinkler head. So that was something we had to fight back on to get them to change that stuff. Okay, so some common health and safety critiques of a risk management program. Health and safety people might say the risk manager is too focused on the numbers, having paralysis by analysis, maybe the wrong numbers, looking at compensable injuries versus just a first report of injury. And if you're not sure what that means, compensable injuries are the ones that cost money, ones that have a lost time part of a claim. And our first report of injury is just something that happened. It could be just a paper cut. It could be a slip and fall where there was no medical costs associated. So the risk management perspective, yes, we emphasize the compensable injuries over the first reports, of course, but both sides are very important. Lack of communication from the risk manager, and then risk manager not letting the safety department know what services the insurance broker will provide, and then lack of awareness or full understanding of risk control issues. Quick commentary: increasing risk transfer or insurance costs means a re-examination of organizational risk retention levels. So always the big question is, when do you self-insure, or maybe you only partly self-insure? Risk retention requires a certain tolerance for risk, which can be assuaged by solid risk control programs. Just some examples here at UT. For many years, our auto insurance was fully insured, but it got to a point where the premiums were just so high that we felt like we're going to come out way ahead if we partly insure. So we have in place now, we have a self-insured retention where any claim under 50 grand, we just pay it out of pocket. And then over 50 grand, it goes to insurance. Workers' comp is fully 100% self-insured here. And then our property damage is basically any loss under 500 grand, then we pay in-house. When it is over, if it's, let's say it's for our windstorm, when it's between 500 grand and 5 million, then the other institution, the other UT institutions, all 14 come together and help pay down that loss. But once it goes to 5 mil, then insurance gets involved. And then one example is the company BP. I went to a talk with their health and safety guy, and he said that BP is fully self-insured on everything. And when Harvey hit, it was just devastating. And he wouldn't even tell us how big the losses were, but they had 2 whole buildings that were completely flooded out and lost power. And it was just amazing to me that they were just completely fully self-insured. Okay, so looking at our insurance premiums and what they were a few years ago, you can just see right off the bat that professional liability, which is generally medical malpractice, is the highest one, $3 million a year. Because as you can imagine, those claims get very, very large very quickly. Property insurance is the next one at a little over, I think that's like 1.7 that year. Our employees workers' comp, that's not a company insurance premium. That's what UT Health pays to like a big pot at UT system overall. And then we have unemployment insurance. Our residents were actually on a separate insurance policy at one point. Now they're together. And then a new one to us, just 5 years ago, we did not have cyber insurance, and then now we do. And now that one really scares not just me, but everyone, because those losses get really, really large. And the cyber insurance companies keep saying that they're not making any money, so that every year we've seen, a 10, 15, 20% increase in our premiums. And then on down, you've got the auto policy fleet, D&O, the directors and officers, and our equipment, crime, and all the way down to our fine arts policy. Okay, so some good information that every risk manager should keep is your list of retained losses. This is not all of them for that year. This is just kind of the highlights. But you can just see, water. And then we actually had a tropical storm, just a little bit of damage from that one. And then one little fire at our housing apartments. And then we broke these out into losses that were covered by a third party. So these were all auto claims that were paid for by a third party. And then what losses did we that were covered by our UT system insurance? None, because again, our basic deductible is 500 grand. So we don't have many that hit that, but when they do, of course, we're glad to have the other institutions help pay. And then broken out to the different loss types. Obviously, water damage is number one by far. Okay, so education and transparency. It's really a big deal to educate your people on losses, what losses happen at your place, which are most common, which are most severe, and how to best prevent them. Throughout the years, I've given presentations to our facilities department and just showed them the numbers. And, over and over every year, it's, 15 to 20 water damages. And some are just kind of nickel and dime, but some, hit 50 grand, some hit 200 grand, like I mentioned earlier. and talking to them about the best ways to prevent those from happening. And in the last 5-8 years, I think we've done a really good job on preventing water damage. We still have some, but they're really small. So being transparent on what losses cost goes a long way to informing these people what they're paying for, because it's not coming out of my department, it's coming out of the facilities department. And one way that we've used to inform the people on campus is just send out a simple sheet like this saying the top 3 losses at UT Health. So as I mentioned, water damage, theft. Theft still happens, but it's not quite a big a deal as it was a few years ago. And then every now and then we do have an electrical power interruption that may cause a big loss on our research. But most research now is duplicated, and we of course have backup generators to make sure that critical equipment stays powered. But at the time, this was a really good tool to let the average person on campus know what our damages, what our causal losses were, and how to prevent those from happening. When I first got here, I just realized there wasn't a person going after people that cause losses here. It's not always, it's not always caused by a UT employee. Sometimes it's a contractor or tenant that has caused damage here. And it's important to go after them. My minimum is once it hits $50, I'm going to go after them. And it's not, obviously it's not just the money at that point, but it's just basically letting that contractor or tenant know that we're gonna get reimbursed for anything that they cause here over $50. So time to time, I've used our legal department and procurement to help collect. Procurement has been especially effective because they're the ones that usually have contracts with some of these vendors, and they can threaten to pull that contract from the vendor and just cancel from them if they don't pay for a loss that they caused. And I'll show you in a spreadsheet how these loss recoveries add up. And of course, bosses love people that bring money in. So here you can see this is our retained loss recoveries from FY12 to FY20. And if you look at these totals, this is big money. This is good money, and it's honestly, it's easy money. Most of the time, it's just me calling a company or maybe a tenant and just say, look, your employee caused this water damage, fire, or what have you, and are you going to file a claim or are you going to pay out of pocket? And most of the time, 9 times out of 10, yeah, I'll file a claim. We'll get you taken care of, because they don't want to lose our business and have a bad reputation either. But you can see every single year we've had a contractor cause some amount of damage. Obviously, this one was gigantic. This was a building this was actually a water damage that shorted out an entire 10 or 12 floors of that building. And then we were down for like 3 or 4 days, so that was a really, really big loss. And then some of these in the other category are auto. We've had our Houston Metro bus. We've had those hit one of our buildings. And I know that sounds kind of funny when a bus hits a building, but we have a breezeway that connects our medical school with the Herman Hospital here in the Med Center, and that breezeway has been hit by multiple times by a bus. It goes under and it scrapes that breezeway, and of course we've tried to do risk controls on that, where we've put up we have some huge metal bollards, overhead bollards, where if the bus hits the bollards, it knows that it's going to hit the building. and you would think they would stop and turn around, but they don't. They keep going and then cause damage. This loss was a Metro bus that didn't put the parking brake on, and it rolled back into the front of one of our buildings and damaged an awning and, of course, the front of the building a little bit. So to summarize, risk management is more than just buying insurance. Successful companies spend big money on risk controls. Risk management can and does minimize exposure to financial loss, protect physical assets. It helps reduce frequency and severity of accidents and provides for a safe environment.
We welcome feedback, questions, and discussions about this presentation. So I did just put one thing into the chat as you're going through the information about recoveries on losses, a term that at the early stages of my safety career I did not understand or appreciate is subrogate or subrogation. And we run into instances where we investigate different incidents that occur. As a safety professional, you may uncover facts of the case about when subrogation may be important. And so communication with the risk management group is really important in that regard. I don't know if you want to chat about that for a moment.
Yeah, so I really talked about subrogation as it relates to property losses, but when it comes to workers' comp, subrogation is a really big deal. Not every employee injury is self-inflicted, so to speak. Sometimes there was, an elevator that malfunctioned that caused a big injury. We've had contractors, we've had housekeeping that used the wrong wax on a floor or just different, having needle sticks. There's just been a lot of different things where it wasn't the employee's fault that they got hurt is what I'm getting at. And our workers' comp department will actively go after a company and get them to pay and offset those claims. And it's just, like I said, most of the time it's easy money. Sometimes it's just a phone call. Sometimes it's a lot of pictures and documentation, which I highly encourage that if you're doing an injury investigation. Always ask that injured person, what do you think caused this? How could we have prevented it? Because they may know better than you, or their supervisor may not know the full story.
Okay, Brian, you got a question here. A great question, actually. How are faculty reimbursed for lost research or damaged equipment, presumably from a fire, water leak, things like that?
That's a tough one to answer because it sometimes varies by building to building. I hate to say that, but it just does. If most losses that I mentioned are not going to hit that $500,000 deductible. So there's a lot of times where the faculty research person, they're on their own and they may get a lecture. Hey, you should have duplicated your research in another building. You should have had different controls in place to guard yourself. And as I mentioned, separation duplication is important, especially for research. So I don't remember too many times where a faculty got reimbursed for anything. And then if it comes to this question always comes up with their personal effects. If you have your expensive baseball card collection on your desk and your office floods, we occasionally get people demanding to get reimbursed for that stuff. And I tell them, it's like, your insurance covers your personal stuff. Our insurance does not cover your personal stuff, and we're not going to reimburse things like that.
Brian, I've got just an add-on to your response from the safety perspective. There's a couple of things that we've had success with. Bryan mentioned on one of the slides the different recommendations that we have for our labs and even our clinical areas and offices to identify high-risk equipment or areas where you simply want to just bring things up off the floor if there's a flooding risk, or cover things, or just move them to a safer area, secure them better. Whatever the case or scenario might be is really important, and that has gone a long way for us. Another example that comes to mind is in our one of our lab buildings, our research buildings. We have our hazard communication signage, which we go to great lengths to update regularly so that there's timely information, accurate information that's being communicated about the research activities that are being conducted within. And oftentimes our researchers will kind of brush us off about that in terms of updating the information, but it's really important. And our safety folks, when they're doing their evaluations, pride themselves on getting this information up to date. Well, this paid off when we had a building sign fire at 10:30 at night at this lab research building. And the fire department came quickly and they started extinguishing the fire with copious amounts of water, of which subsequently started going into 2 of our floors of laboratories. And Snehal, who you're going to hear from in a little while, he and I were some of the first responders on site in addition to the fire department. And when we went into the lab space where we were taking on water, we were able to quickly identify whose lab it was, what risks were inside, but also we were able to get the after hours emergency contact information for the research investigators to say, hey, guys, we've got an issue in your lab. And they said, we know, we're watching it on the news right now. And we figured that was our lab. And oh, by the way, you have high risk equipment that is at risk of getting wet. What can we do to safely, to get this stuff to safety? And they were able to guide us over the phone, and they were very thankful about that. So I think we were able to avoid a huge loss there. So just those subtleties of the day-to-day things that we do in safety can go a long way there. Bryan, another question here regarding risk controls. Is there a standard industry information on the most effective to least effective controls in terms of reducing risk?
That's a good question. Everyone's going to have a different opinion on that. But as we mentioned on that one slide, on a bunch of slides, water damage is number one. So you're going to have water damages all the time. So number one is always keep your stuff off the floor. Computers, your power strips. And when it comes to research, separation, duplication, having things on backup power. But I've never seen a standard industry, a handout or something like that.
I think the standard approach is to conduct a risk assessment for your organization and then rank those risks based on the assessment, and then come to agreement with your leadership in terms of where the priorities are for interventions and controls. I think that's what's most important.
That's a great point.
And knowing
what happens most often, again, frequency and then severity, putting those into place. It's probably the best place to start, put it that way.
So I was going to interject here for a moment. Each risk management program within an organization, especially in the universities, may be parked in a different organizational unit within the institution. We just so happen to be lucky enough to have convinced our leadership to have risk management parked under our department. And there are many benefits to that. It doesn't have to be that way, but I would highly encourage all of our participants to understand who their risk management people are, how they're organizationally aligned, and to make sure you have connections with them. You should know them. You should have frequent touch points and contact with them. I can't tell you how often we go in and do these EHS program peer reviews, and we ask the safety programs about their priorities and their initiatives, and they might spout off a couple of things, but there's so oftentimes there's no connection to accident and injury occurrence or experience on that campus, because they say, well, we don't really have that information holistically. It's kept by risk management. I would argue that the safety program, in order to be most effective and to most effectively set their priorities, they need to know that information. So they should know their risk management folks very well.
Yeah, and just another specific point on that is knowing what your organization's deductible is. A lot of decisions are based upon what that deductible is, how many losses per year get to that deductible, and then what insurance applications are available. One thing I didn't mention is we do have an equipment floater insurance. So everything at UT Health is insured, but it's a $500,000 deductible. So we have a separate policy that you can put a single piece of equipment on that essentially it basically lowers the deductible to a very reasonable amount. It's usually like either $1,000 or it's $2,500, depending what it is. So our researchers can put their MRI machine or very expensive microscope on that equipment policy and have that insured for a reasonable deductible.
And so, Bryan, we've got Dennis here who's chimed in. In the Navy, we would use risk management briefs prior to our evaluations to talk about risk and implement controls to minimize damage and risk to personnel. Absolutely. I would challenge all of our participants, if you don't already have access to or have not seen your risk management matrix for your organization, you should. We routinely meet with our risk management group and compliance group, by the way, to submit a list of all of the risks, including what our organization calls A-level risks. Those are viewed as the highest level of risks on our campus. Those A-level risks, we have to show in gory detail how we are managing those risks to contain those risks effectively and keep people healthy and safe on our campus. You should see that list for your own organization. If you haven't seen it already, I would make that part of your homework from this course. It'll broaden your understanding of the institution and your expectations as a department to serve the institution by having that list. And one other quick note about the Navy, for those of you who don't know, our previous chancellor over UT system was Admiral William McRaven. Bill McRaven used to be the special ops commander under President Obama. And then he was our chancellor for a number of years. I got to see him speak several times in person, which is just a phenomenal experience. For those of you who don't know him, you can do a quick Google search and watch a YouTube video on his speeches. They're amazing. But anyways, he talks often about risk and risk management. But his points that he often makes is about understanding risk and being able to take measured risks to make progress and to be successful in life and in the work setting, and certainly in the university setting where we exist. The first time I heard him say that in person, I got a little queasy as a safety professional, but then I realized the points that he was making was that understanding and measuring those risks and then implementing appropriate controls to protect your people and your property is what is necessary to make progress. And I really buy into what he has to say over the course of my experience as a health and safety professional and hearing his compelling thoughts on it. So Google him up. He's an amazing guy. Okay, everybody, I've got 10:30 a.m. Let's get restarted here. Hope you guys enjoyed that opening presentation from Bryan Evans on risk management. Before we get started on our next session, I was remiss during the introductions to encourage everybody to go in and introduce themselves on our Canvas webpage here, because we have many participants from around the country and we're not in the same room together to interact directly. We figured it would be great for everybody to get to know each other online virtually here. So if you go to the Canvas site to this welcome introduction, objectives and review, you can, excuse me, I took you to the wrong place. Go back one step there. If you go to participant introduction discussion board, you can actually put an introduction here and introduce yourself. Just tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and something fun about yourself. It'd be a good way to get people to know each other. By the way, we have participation from folks across our UT system institutions. We have participants from the Texas A&M system. We have participants from the University of Vermont. We have participants from many of the institutions within the California state system and others. And so I just wanted to make sure you guys all got to know each other a little bit. So please do some introductions on the Canvas webpage so people can get to know you. And we don't leave here empty-handed in terms of your adding to your Rolodex. Okay, moving forward, it is my pleasure to introduce to you Snehal Rana, who is our safety manager over our occupational safety and fire prevention program, as we call it. And he's going to cover the next two sessions for today. The first being fire and life safety basics, and then occupational safety basics. For those of you who might have pulled open our agenda, we don't have an official break built in, but we will give you 5 minutes in between those two sessions just to get up and stretch the legs and take a bio break if necessary. So we've got until 11:45 for fire and life safety basics. Snehal has a couple of his team members here to help out. They're going to introduce themselves. Take it away, Snehal.
Thank you, Scott. First of all, welcome everyone. My name is Snehal Rana. Originally, I started off in chemical safety here, worked with a lot of ergonomics and protocols and protocol reviews. And then over the last 5 years, I've been in fire and life safety program here. And essentially, we do have 14 buildings across campus. And it's, I believe it's 5 million square feet. So there's quite a lot of territory to cover here. So let me get my screen queued up here. Okay, so it's going to be fire and life safety basics. It's going to cover a lot of what you guys may have heard of and maybe some things you haven't. So by the end of this module, you're going to be able to describe the importance of fire and life safety codes and the need for them, identify the components of fire protection systems, and also understand how to tailor your fire and life safety program to the needs for researchers and your personnel across campus. So first of all, why do we need fire and life safety? Essentially, there's been fires that have caused deaths and lots of injuries over the years. Some of the main fires that have occurred that have led to a new code generation. For example, the Chicago fire caused 602 fatalities. Panic hardware was created so people could get out. Door swings, so swinging of the door going out of a building. And then separation, proscenium separation. So stages weren't all huddled together. So there was separation, allowing walkways and pathways. And then the triangle shirtwaist fire in Manhattan. This was 146 fatalities. And one of the things about this one was there was a lot of younger kids that were working at this time. And so there was a committee created for safety to life. And that also led to life safety code. And then the last one was in Boston, 492. And this created a need or realization for the need for continuous visible exit signs and no locking of egress doors. So you couldn't lock an exit door during building operating hours. And there's been a lot of other fires and casualties that have occurred. And a lot of code is written in what they say, written in blood, because without injuries or fatalities, new code doesn't always get generated very quickly. But when fatalities occur, new codes are created very quickly. So some of the information here that you see on this chart, this is from 2021. The main takeaway here is most of the fires that are occurring, civilian deaths, 74% are actually in the home. So a lot of your businesses and workplaces, your academic institutions are fairly safe. So 26% of the actual civilian deaths that occurred were in non-sprinkled, 26% of the casualties were in sprinkled buildings, and the other remaining 75 or 74% were in homes. This shows you that the actual home is very unsafe, only because you don't have fire protection systems in place, you don't have building fire alarms in place, and you don't have the same level of care or thought that's required. And that's one of the things that our fire and life safety program does, is it is constantly overseeing and practicing and reaching out to occupants and buildings and personnel to educate them and to show them the needs to have egress pathways, including inspection, testing, and maintenance done on a regular basis. So there are different codes, OSHA 29, CFR 1910, 126, and 1926. And then there's different fire and life safety codes. IBC has International Building Code, National Fire Protection Association, and then your local city or municipal requirements. Each of these codes are important, and you always want to follow the most stringent code when possible. So you want to take a look at city code, and sometimes city code will vary slightly than other codes. However, always select the most stringent code and follow that particular code. Here, we follow NFPA code, but your institution may be slightly different. But if you are a state institution, then you want to definitely follow NFPA as well. So codes and standards are incorporated by reference. So what that means is if a code is existing elsewhere, then it can be adopted into NFPA code. For example, if it's another standard, then it can be adopted into NFPA code and be used as a reference as well. And then similarly, OSHA, they'll reference codes and standards from these different organizations. And it's important to identify which edition of a particular code applies when evaluating a building or plans. So, for example, if your state fire marshal hasn't adopted the most recent one, then you need to take a look at the 2018 edition. So, for example, come September, a lot of the NFPA code for the state of Texas will be adopted on September 1st for the 2021 edition of NFPA code. So here's some common codes developed by code making panels and technical committees within NFPA. A lot of these are volunteer individuals that have technical experience and expertise in their field. So they are experts in their field, and they provide a lot of information and work to help keep everyone safe. So these are the common ones that you'll come across in the university environment. 101, Life Safety Code, is probably one of the most prevalent ones that you'll use day in and day out. And then all the other ones are required for inspection, testing, and maintenance, for fire alarms, sprinklers, and then electric code and fire extinguishers, which have to be regularly maintained as well. And then also IBC, International Building Code, and then International Fire Code. Again, always use the most stringent code when possible. So how are codes enforced? So codes are important to keep everyone, property and persons safe in the areas that you're in. So many codes and standards are adopted or incorporated by reference by the AHJ or authority having jurisdiction. Here on campus at UT Health Houston, we, EHS, are the authority having jurisdiction, so we have the final call on a lot of these codes. Remodeling or new construction plans must be approved by the AHJ prior to starting work. It's a very important process when you do have construction that you are working closely with any new construction or remodeling to make sure that they are staying within code. A lot of contractors, they're trying to complete whatever project they're working on in as quick and as efficient a manner as possible. And sometimes that means circumventing code. That means they will not, they may not take the additional time to maybe turn a sprinkler head the right way or make sure that a wall is placed appropriately to provide adequate sprinkler protection. And those are things that when you are working with contractors in new construction and remodeling, that you're taking a look at that. So as a local AHJ, you want to make sure that you are enforcing and encouraging individuals to follow the correct code. Local city local city officials and then state fire marshal will also come through and enforce code when necessary. Additional code requirements. All codes are minimum requirements, so you want to go above and beyond in some cases. In some cases, that's not really possible or it's unnecessary. For example, if it's cost prohibitive. For example, we do have a building on campus here. It's an older building that does require sprinkling. However, we are probably not going to get that sprinkled anytime soon because the cost is just a very extravagant cost. So we are in the process of building a new housing unit that will have fully sprinkled system and everything like that. It doesn't mean we don't have fire alarms in place. It doesn't mean that we don't have fire extinguishers readily available, but it is not a fully sprinkled building per code. And so when we do build it again, we will comply with IBC and NFPA and have it fully sprinkled. Also, insurance company requirements, institutional policies, Joint Commission. So if it's a hospital, the Joint Commission, and then additional state and or city requirements that are necessary for that particular area that is requiring additional code enforcement. So features of building fire and life systems. So alarms, sprinklers, standpipes, which provide water to the sprinkler systems, fire pumps, rated corridors, walls, exit access, signage, number of required units or exits, egress widths and pathways, occupant loads, so how many people can be within an area, elevator recalls, fire rated doors and frames, and then fire extinguishers. All these are features of building fire and life systems. And there's probably a few that we're missing on this particular list. However, each of these should be maintained in good working order, inspected and tested on a regular basis, and good record keeping kept. So anything that is a fire and life system within your campus or building, make sure that you are regularly and adequately record keeping as well as checking those units. So NFPA 101 Life Safety Code. This is one of the most commonly used codes that we have across campus. The purpose is to minimize the danger to life and provides a safe means of escape for all individuals. You can get a complete list of codes, further code at nfpa.org. I don't know the exact total count, but there's quite a few codes that cover all fire and life safety systems within a building. So one of the things about code, make sure that when you do open up code that you are reading the scope of the code itself. The scope can be found in chapter 1 of the book. And make sure that when you are looking through that you understand the symbols that are listed throughout the code book and understand the language and how it is used in the code. Pay close attention to references to other code that may impact your initial search. So essentially, when you are reading code, it sometimes can be great bedtime reading. It gets really complex and sometimes a little bit redundant, and it may reference other codes on a regular basis. So make sure that when you are looking through code that you're very patient, that you are using the references that are that are marked, and most of all, just be patient and understand the language and the wording on it to find your solution. And a lot of times, one code may lead you to another area altogether, and you may come to find out that there's other deficiencies in other code because the building's older, the stairwells are too narrow. For example, we have a building here where the stairwells are too narrow. It's not within code. However, to rebuild a fire stairwell would be again an extravagant cost that we're not going to carry on or take over. And so we're making additional allowances for that particular space. So NFPA language, comply with one of the following, comply with all of the following, and versus or, where permitted by, where required by. Make sure that when you are looking through code and when you're reading it, that you're paying very close attention to the wording. The wording is gonna dictate what you need to do, and if you truly need to do it, it might be well, if you're doing this, then you don't need to do that. So, for example, when you are reading through code, pay close attention into how the wording is used and the language is used. So, fire alarm systems play an essential role in protecting property and lives from fire by notifying occupants and responders, and is required by Life Safety Code or 101. So, in the past, when a fire alarm was going off or when there was a fire, the reason this came about, where there's a requirement for a notification system for the building, is when a fire did occur, individuals wouldn't know. So if there was a party or it was a loud event, then nobody could hear that a fire occurred. And so that it caused deaths. And so when the deaths occurred, they created code, and the code in NFPA 101 now requires a notification system for occupancies. NFPA 72, National Fire Alarm Code, provides information for the application, installation, location, performance, and ITM, or inspection, testing, and maintenance for alarm systems. Some of the basic components of a fire alarm system: system control unit, primary power supply, secondary, initiating device circuits, notification appliances, and also a off-premises connection to supervision. So if you look at this right here, the primary power supply is going to be obviously the one that's wired into the wall, but you're going to need to have a backup in case power fails. And so when you have a backup power supply, that battery needs to be maintained and it needs to be replaced if it does fail for whatever reason. Now, you have different initiating devices which will set the building into alarm. So smoke detectors, heat detectors, fire alarm pull stations, duct detectors will have different devices which will set the building into alarm. And then to alert everybody that's within the building, you'll have different notification devices like a horn or a strobe or a bell or a PA system or announcement or a horn strobe. So you'll have different types of devices which will alert individuals. And then the control panel will relay a message to whoever is offsite, whoever's offsite, so they know that there is an alarm. So for example, our buildings here, we are 24/7 monitored. They're all fully sprinkled, but in the event that a fire alarm is activated, we get a Metasys alert, is what they call it. It's a notification on our cell phones, and we also get an email. And once we get that alert, UT Police here as well will get an alert or a notification. And then we'll talk about this a little bit more during fire alarm response. However, there is a process for notification and communication. So fire alarm signals, when you do go to the alarm, you'll have different types of signals: alarm, supervisory, or trouble. A trouble alarm indicates a fault in a monitored circuit or component of the fire alarm system. So a trouble could be a wiring issue, somebody's doing some construction, somebody cut something. It's simply the system still functions, but there is something that needs repair or requires repair. A supervisory indicates a need for action in connection with the supervision of the fire suppression system or other monitored system. So supervisory, this is when somebody's actually doing work. Again, this one, the system is still, it does require attention, and it's a little bit more urgent. And then alarm is obviously when there is a fire. This requires an immediate attention, and it'll prompt the building fire alarm system to activate. And this is what people would understand as a building fire alarm. The troubles and supervisories, if you have an annunciator panel, and I'll discuss that a little bit later this morning, but an annunciator panel, you can get troubles and supervisories, and those really bother the people. Like, for example, if it's a guard or if it's an office, when they get these troubles or supervisory, it really bothers them because they can't do anything about it. And those, unfortunately, have to be put into service, and those will continue to be until they are corrected. So fire detection, so different types of detectors are available, and all these are available across campus here, and most of your campuses will probably have similar. On the top is a smoke detector, then on the left is a duct detector. So if there was fire or something that was caught in the duct smoke particles, then that would actually set off the alarm. Then you also have heat detectors as well. So it's very important that you have something that can passively recognize heat, smoke, or whatever danger, or fire, whatever danger that you're in. Another way to set the building into alarm is not only the fire detection systems, but also the manual pull stations. So manual pull stations will generally be located near the exit signs or exits of buildings. And these will be activated by pulling on the handle itself. If you've never activated a fire alarm pull station, next time there's a fire drill, I encourage you strongly to at least do it one time. It's a different experience. And it's pretty cool just because you can set the building into alarm, but you normally can't. Unfortunately, recently we've had some individuals in different schools. For example, we have a dental school, and we had a younger individual just pull the fire alarm, pull station, set the building into alarm. Obviously, it causes disruption, but we know it worked. Device will send a signal to the building's fire alarm system, which places the building into alarm. And again, once the building fire alarm system is activated, everybody within the building or within the floors adjacent to it, and I'll explain the high-rise fire alarm notification a little bit later. But once the fire alarm is pulled, the building will go into alarm, and also the police or whoever the monitoring system is that you guys use will receive an alert as well. Notification appliances, there are different ones. So for example, in the audible, so for the public announcement must be 5 decibels above any ambient noise that lasts 60 seconds or more. And so it just depends on how loud the space is. So if it's a quiet library, it's going to be a much quieter than if it's an industrial environment where there's a lot of hammering or machinery. Sleeping quarters need to have a minimum of 75 decibels. And then voice communication, all panels need to have the ability to speak through the panel itself, so you can notify the individuals within the building of any type of emergency. So if you need to say, if there's if the Houston Fire Department or the fire department in your area come out, or if other emergency personnel need to make an announcement, you can do so over that intercom to get people out. Other notification appliances, visual alarms, they're primarily intended to augment audible alarms, and they can be designed also for hearing impaired in particular spaces. Common locations of visual alarms or strobes are going to be corridors, meeting rooms, restrooms, elevator lobbies, and multi-person offices. Location required may vary based on occupancy and or code, and sometimes also building standards. So you may have a building standard that you prefer to have a strobe. For example, our building standard here now with new construction is placing the strobe up higher versus in the past it would be on the walls. So now we're placing them on the ceiling when possible. So fire alarm system interfaces. All these are very important features of a fire alarm system interface. For example, the HVAC, the air handler shutdown, duct detectors work to shut them down if there is smoke that's captured by the detector itself. It'll also shut down the fire and smoke dampers, so smoke is not filtered throughout the building. Sprinkler water flow alarms. So a sprinkler water flow alarm, if a sprinkler head is activated by high heat, meaning that there's a fire, then that will put the building into alarm. Also, magnetic lock release. So if you have mag locks on a door, these will fall out or to allow people to pass through. Door unlocking devices, elevator recall, stairwell pressurizations to prevent the fire stairwell from getting smoke in there. Those are only 2-hour rated. And then also roll down doors. And those are tested regularly to prevent smoke from, again, either getting into an area that needs to have a separate smoke compartment or to keep a stairwell free and clear of smoke. So some of the key elements of a fire and life safety program, and there's additional ones that are out there, I'm sure, but some of these are very, very important, and some are more important than others. Partner with your key stakeholders. Understand the needs in relation to your research, teaching, and compliance. So when you are working to create a fire and life safety program, sometimes there's going to be things that you need, and sometimes there's things you don't need. And then same with the researchers or the personnel that you have. You want to make sure you do a proper risk assessment. So identify all hazards and risks, storage areas, chemicals, combustibles, construction, know where your contractors are. Sometimes contractors come with a different mindset when it comes to safety. And it's also a benefit to when creating or tailoring a program, when you do have new contractors, to create something called a pre-construction meeting, or so you can huddle with the contractors before a project starts. So you can let them know what they need to do to create a safety plan and what they need to do in the event there is a fire, meaning they need to move and exit the building as well. Personnel, some personnel are going to have riskier work than others, and then materials and equipment. So know the materials and equipment that you have within your spaces. Also, when selecting furniture and things like that, make sure that it's non-combustible materials and non-toxic as well. Code compliance. Be familiar with relevant codes, inspection, testing, and maintenance. Be familiar with relevant codes is important because when you are walking across campus and you come across something or encounter something, a lot of stuff you'll know right away. For example, egress pathways are blocked here occasionally. When you are blocking the egress pathway, you're changing the width of the hallway itself or corridor. And then same thing goes with fire stairwells. There should be no storage in a fire stairwell, and those things shouldn't happen. And so you should be familiar with the need for that for under your life safety. Develop processes and programs once you have the information, the risks, and the needs of the key stakeholders. Training, education, and surveys. Make sure that these are done regularly and frequently. Programs, processes, and surveys. Investigate and track. Make sure that everything that you guys are doing as much as possible, have a solid record keeping and always follow up and correct any deficiencies. One of the worst things that can happen is you notice something and you didn't get it corrected and then it just goes forgotten. So make sure that if you do see something, get it corrected as quickly as possible and follow up on that. Improve processes and programs. Build upon all feedback, whether it's negative or positive, and just work to make your program better each and every day, a quarter, year, whatever it may be. Strive to improve with people, processes, and technology. Don't be afraid to get new technology or to change up your process to make it more efficient or to streamline it. And then also there's applications available, there's technology available that's out there. Yeah, there's an initial cost to this, but in the long run, it would make life easier, not only for you, for communication, for sharing of data, for record keeping as well. And then maintain and cultivate partnerships. Never take anything that anyone says personally. You need to have a short memory for anytime somebody gets upset at you. For example, if you're in a lab and a researcher or an office personnel get upset and yell at you, make sure that you don't wear your emotions on your sleeves and just say, hey, I'll take care of it, defer and try to diffuse the situation. And sometimes, I have a different group of people. I'll send, if I know one of my people is acquainted with a researcher, then I'll send that individual to work with that researcher to get something done. Recently, we had a lab that had extension cords running all the way across the lab. It was discovered just in passing, but there's absolutely no reason to have extension cords running the course of the entire lab. And so, we had somebody go out there and talk to them. And they were happy in the end, but they just were told by somebody else, not in safety, but somebody else that, hey, it's okay to have extension cords all through your lab, which is not. And then keep everyone happy and then hone all the relationships that you have, whether it's researchers, personnel, contractors. It goes a long way for them to be able to call you up and say, hey, I have this, and then it doesn't get to a point where it's too late to help them out. And in summary, codes drive facility fire and life safety requirements. Know what codes apply to your operation. All codes are minimum requirements. Know who the AHJ is. They carry a lot of weight when dealing with codes. And then maintain systems in accordance with code compliance requirements and manufacturer's recommendations. Sometimes the compliance may be for joint commissions. We want to make sure that we are complying with them, or it could be with another governing body that we want to follow through with. Aside from that, Scott, if you have anything to add, sir?
Yeah, great presentation, Snehal. I'd open it up for anybody to chime in now with any questions or discussion about this introductory presentation on fire and life safety. I will say that these basic functions and features of the buildings are very important to understand as a safety professional, regardless of your specialty area. And these are probably some of the more universal skills and information that you can carry with you, not just in the academic setting, but any setting. And so I would encourage you to learn about the basics of fire and life safety within your organizations. If you don't already understand these things, this is all very important stuff. We expect all of our safety professionals to participate in fire alarm response because Snehal and his team of experts can't be everywhere all the time. And so we share that responsibility among all of our team members within our department. And so if somebody in our chemical safety or biosafety or radiation safety program is in a particular building, the fire alarm goes off, guess what? They're responding to the fire panel just as if they're in Snehal's group to be able to do the basic things to triage what's going on, to make some basic announcements to our building occupants about what to do in the event of that alarm, and to call in to our UT police or otherwise as necessary, depending on the situation. So really important skill sets here.
Yeah, that's a good point you mentioned, Scott. There are campuses where they only have one individual who will always respond to the fire alarm. It doesn't work when you have a very spread out campus as we do. And so for us to get to one side of the campus to the other, it can take 20 to 30 minutes in some cases. And so it is a good idea to do a little cross training and partner with some of the other safety professionals.
For those of you guys who know me, have probably heard me say this before, but I truly believe this as my core as a safety professional. If we are doing our jobs right on our campuses, then we should know our people and our spaces better than anybody else on our campus. In particular, our fire and life safety personnel are spread out across all of our buildings all the time. They visit every square foot of our campus on a regular basis. And so the point is, when you're out doing your safety evaluations, whether it's in a laboratory, a clinic, a classroom, office area, on a roof, or around your buildings, keep your eyes open and attuned for these basic but important fire and life safety functions and issues. All right, Snehal, I'm going to kick this back to you. I know you have a team there to assist you with a few additional presentations here on fire and life safety, if we don't have any other questions or concerns.
Yeah, so next up, we're going to have NFPA core basics, and we're going to have Cedric Peace talk, and then a little bit after that, we'll discuss with Christopher Hall fire sprinkler systems, and then we'll talk a little bit more about fire alarm response to wrap up fire and life safety. Just a second, let me screen share for you guys.
While you're sharing the screen, I will tell you that I'm very proud of both you and Bryan for doing such a good job this morning, because I know both of you have been crying yourselves to sleep over the last couple of nights since the University of Houston basketball team lost. They missed out on an opportunity to get to the Final Four here in their hometown in Houston. So sorry your team lost.
Yeah, looks like all of them got knocked out for the first time ever.
All the Texas teams.
Yes. Well, no, all the highest seeded ones.
The highest seed ones, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, hang on just a second.
Okay, so good morning, everyone. My name is Cedric Peace. I'm a certified fire inspector here at UT with Snehal's group. I've been doing fire safety surveys for over 17 years now. I've worked with architecture firms before that, as my degree was in architecture. So I view safety from an architectural point of view. Today, our objectives are basically, we're going to go over some of the simple rudimentary overview of a small piece of NFPA 101. We're going to go through 3 core chapters. We're going to show how they're referred to and give examples of how they apply to our safety duties. So as Snehal mentioned earlier, NFPA was written in blood. It's basically a set of codes and standards that has the goal of eliminating death, injury, property, and economic loss due to fire and electrical and related hazards. We have historical fires such as the Chicago fire that happened in the 1800s, where one fire spread throughout destroyed 17,000 buildings based on the prevalent use of wood construction. And then we have the 1942 Coconut Grove fire shown here, where it was over almost 500 deaths. And basically those deaths were due to blocked exits, people stumbling in the dark during the fire as electricity went out, and then basically everybody showed up or tried to get out of one single revolving door. and clogged up the door. We also have recent fires such as the 2003 Station nightclub fire, where in a small nightclub, they were doing a little concert, giving a show using pyrotechnics, such as you see there. The pyrotechnics start to set the stage on fire. If you can look through the cameraman's lens, you see the stage actually catches on fire. People actually delayed egressing out because they couldn't hear the fire alarm and they thought the fire was part of the act. But as they realized that it was a fire actually brewing, people tried to escape, and the mindset is usually you go out the same way that you come in. So you need to keep that in mind as you're doing emergency planning. And you see here, since everybody rushed the front door that they came in, a lot of the people actually got stuck. They clogged up that one exit, and you see people are actually crammed inside of the exit. So these type of fires influences NFPA. You see here with NFPA, if they were following NFPA, they would have noticed that it would have been classified as an assembly occupancy. And then under the assembly occupancy, you see that they have pre-event egress inspections, which this building did not have. If they did a pre-event egress inspection, they would have noticed locked doors, locked doors out there. So if you look at this floor plan here, this is the main entrance where people tried to get out of when the fire started. This is the stage where the fire started, and this is where everyone was assembled during the concert. So you see the architect actually provided enough exits, but this exit was impeded due to a security guard not realizing it was a fire. So he only let the band get out and kept other people from getting out. These two exits, I believe, were actually locked with chains, so to keep people from getting in free to sneak into the event, but they were actually locked. So if they had pre-event inspections, they would have recognized that these doors were locked. They would have come up with a different security measure so that people could have used those exits. And then they did not have any pre-event emergency instructions. So before the event, the NFPA requires someone to actually let people know where the different exits are, and also how to recognize fire alarm strobes versus anything that's going on stage. Also, they had incorrect interior finish. That's why the pyrotechnics were able to set the place on fire. The egress, as stated earlier, egress system was provided, but it was impeded by security guard and locked exits. And the building construction was correct, but it was all wood, and you can see the aftermath of the fire when you have an all wood building. So right here, in order to start applying NFPA, NFPA would apply when you're doing plan reviews for a new building, when you're doing any renovations to an existing buildings. But right here, we're going to go over how NFPA is set up. So the top three chapters are basically administration. And then the next set of chapters are going to be called the core chapters. If you read through the core chapters, it sounds like all of these rules apply to every building, but they actually don't. Actually, what a person have to do to apply NFPA is you have to go to the occupancy chapter first. So based on the type of building that the building is being used for, that's the occupancy chapter, it will refer you back to the sections of the core chapters that would apply to that occupancy chapter. And then for the purposes of time, we're not going to go through all of the core chapters. We're just going to go through 3 of the core chapters. We're going to go through chapter 6, classification of occupancies, chapter 7, which is means of egress, and chapter 8, features of fire protection. But I would encourage everyone to read through the other core chapters just to become familiar with the other rules and know how to find those rules when needed. So the first part is building classification. Basically, this is a system of defining the predominant operating characteristics of a portion of a building or the building itself for purposes of applying relevant sections of the code. So if we go through here, we're showing the different sections that building classifications can fall into an NFPA, and being sure to classify a building correctly. You want to make sure it's the right classification, as occupancy classification drives the requirements for the different life safety features. if these features are unique and expected characteristics for the anticipated occupants. If you don't classify a building correctly, you can over or under apply necessary code requirements. Some examples of the occupancies that we have here on our campus. We have assembly occupancies, which are used for the gathering of more than 50 people or more. But it's the characteristic of basically somebody falling into a herd mentality during evacuation. Another occupancy that we have are storage occupancies that's seen here, the parking garage. Parking garages, you're storing cars and vehicles there, so it's considered storage, and or warehouses, and warehouses speak for themselves. And then another one that was really prevalent on our campus are going to be business occupancies. This is an occupancy used for the transaction of business other than merchandising. So right here it shows that we have 15 classifications that a building can fall into. And you can see the different kinds such as healthcare, residential boarding care, detention, educational. Something important about educational is educational only refers to schools that are K through 12. College, universities, and above the 12th grade level are considered business occupancies. So once you get your area or the building that you're looking at or doing your inspections for identified and classified, that you'll notice that at most buildings, they're going to have what's called mixed occupancies, such as our Institute of Molecular Medicine building that we have here, where on our upper floors, we have laboratories and business offices. So those are going to be classified as a business occupancy. And then we have conference room space in a large auditorium, which are going to be assembly occupancies. So it'll be one building with mixed occupancies. So when you do have a building with mixed occupancies, there are two options that you have to follow according to NFPA Chapter 6. One is going to be you have to abide by the most restrictive requirements out of the occupancies, or you could use what's called separated occupancies. Mostly in common, you'll see these on storefronts where you have different occupancies in one building, but you would separate them with firewalls in between each type of occupancy. In my opinion, this is the most safe route to go. Because if you have like a nightclub, which is an assembly, next to a clinic, which is a business, and have that all next to a storage, you will want to keep those three types of occupancy separated with firewalls. Also, in Chapter 6, you will notice there's a chart. So when you use separated occupancies, the chart in Chapter 6 requires separation of occupancies by hours. It'll show you the required separation that you have to have between two different types of occupancies. For example, if you have a business occupancy next to a storage occupancy, you would follow the chart and realize that you have to have a 2-hour separation between those two facilities. And then if you read the fine print in a lot of these charts, sometimes this is reduced by 1 hour if both occupancies are sprinkled. Next, go through the hazards of content. So every building, you're going to have incidental space in every type of occupancy. So shown here on the southern part of this floor plan, with the building that we're actually officed in, you're going to have rooms such as mechanical rooms or high storage rooms or print shop that stores different flammable chemicals inside of a business occupancies. So you have to identify those spaces. And once they're identified, you have to classify those areas as high hazards, low hazards, or medium hazards. And depending on what's in there, you may have to separate them with fire-rated construction or just have sprinkler systems. But if it's a high hazard, you'll have to have both fire-rated construction and sprinkler system. And the classifications are low hazard, ordinary hazards, and high hazards. And it's all going to be found in your occupancy chapters. So in conclusion for the first part, Chapter 6, classification of occupancy and hazards of content. In NFPA, first you want to classify the space that you're looking at, then determine separation requirements. Are you going to use mixed occupancies or you're going to use construction separation? And then identify and separate any hazardous area. Looking back at the station fire, if we were able to, or if they were able to actually separate their assembly area from the business area, it probably would have bought a lot of people a lot of more time as the effects of the fire would have been stopped by a separation barrier. That gave people more time to get out and also gave the operators time to unlock these doors. So next, we're going to go through the means of egress. So means of egress is Chapter 7 of NFPA, and basically it's about evacuation, withdrawal of occupants from a building safely. The means of egress, the first are going to go through the different components of egress, such as the doors, how wide the doors have to be, and the minimum leaf width. They're going to talk about floor level in the means of egress, how much force you have to apply to open the door, and then the swing direction of the door, when they are required to swing outward versus when they're swing in, and then the different locks and latches and alarm devices that are allowed on egress doors. Next, it'll go through the capacity of the means of egress. They want to ensure sufficient egress for the occupant load that's in the building. The occupant load is generally found by applying this formula. You take the square footage of the space, type of space, and then you use these factor numbers that are given in NFPA's chart. And then you divide your factor number into the square footage. It'll give you a total number for each space or each occupancy type. You add those numbers together to give you a total occupant load. Once you get the total occupant load, then you can go ahead and apply these other charts and other rules that'll tell you how many, or the number of means of egress, or how many exits you'll need based on how many people are in the building. And then it'll tell you how wide those different exits have to be according to your occupancy numbers. And then it'll go into the arrangement of egress. So once you know how many exits you need, then it's going to be arranged so that one fire can't block a person from getting to either one of the exits. So they'll have you go through the rules of how far apart to put place the exits. And then it'll go through how far a person has to travel to get to those exits. And then those sets of rules that'll talk about how long a dead end can be based on the building, such as in a business occupancy, the dead end can exceed 50 feet. Then it'll go through what's really important, is could be overlooked really easily, is the common path of travel. Basically, how long do you travel before you have two options that you can use to get out of the building. So in business, if the building is sprinkled, you can't travel more than 100 feet before you reach a point to where you have two options to get out of a building. And then the overall travel distance, you don't want, in a business, the overall travel distances can exceed 300 feet. So you have to go to your different occupancy chapters to see what their rules are for the travel distance and the common paths of travel in dead-end corridors. Finally, well, not finally, but next, Chapter 7 goes through exit discharge. So you don't want people to get to the final exit door and get trapped in a small yard. You want them to be able to get to a safe distance away from the building so that the firefighters can respond in the way that they need to respond. So next, code goes, Chapter 7 goes over emergency lighting. It goes over exit sign locations, and then it has special provisions for how egress provisions for hazardous areas, such as rooms with hazardous contents or hazardous materials, mechanical and equipment rooms, and then also unoccupied building service equipment support areas like roofs and large, when you have one entire floor that's a mechanical room. And then finally, something new that's been added to the code is an option for occupant evacuation elevators. I have not ever run across this, as this is going to be new, but they're going to be new occupancy evacuation elevators that could be used during a fire. So in conclusion for this section, basically egress, Chapter 7 is going to go over how to safely evacuate occupants. It's going to show the requirements for the components in the means of egress. It's going to give you the occupancy load and egress capacity, which is going to determine the number of exits. It's going to tell you how to arrange those exits, and then it's going to let you know the travel distances, and then it go over illumination and emergency lighting. So we're going to apply this. We're going to do I'll show you a fictitious project that we have here. We're going to change a warehouse to an office space. So to go pretend that this is a real building. This is one of our office buildings here on campus. And these are the office spaces. And then this building right here that's parked on top of our parking garage is a warehouse storage space. So when it's a warehouse storage space, according to that occupancy rule, this space is allowed to have a single means of egress to get out of this warehouse. So it meets the code. But when we changed that, it's the same space to a university program. Now we have office suites and cubicles. The requirement that you'll find in that occupancy chapter is you can't have less than 2 separate exits on every story. So now we have this section of the building. We only had 1 exit in the beginning, but the architect would decide to connect to the existing building. So now he would have 3 exits that he can use. The question was about dormitories. What was the question? For dormitories, there's a specific occupancy chapter that goes over dormitories, and I would have to switch back to say, I think it was board and care chapter, but you would go to, or an apartment building, there's an apartments occupancy chapter. So you would have to read through the occupancy chapters to see the rules for that. Okay, so back to the office space, you have to have not less than 2 exits. So the architect opened it up to the existing office space, and it looked like he had 3 exits. So it looks like he met that rule. And so when you looked at the travel distance for the space, this is the common path of egress, 1 leading this way, 1 leading to the existing exits. But you remember the common path of travel should not exceed 100 feet. So 100 feet in this building only went up to maybe around this area here before they can actually get to a spot where they had 2 ways out. So it didn't meet the, or at least trying to use these 2 exits didn't meet the code. So what they had to do is they had to actually design a new exit stair to the building. So now once they have that exit stair, everything met the code. So now we're going to the features of fire protection. This is our final section. So features of fire protection is basically going to go over the construction and compartmentation of a building. The construction basically showing what types of construction materials can be used, and then a construction compartmentation, which is how to contain a fire in one part of the building. So that gives time for other people to egress. So as building technology increased, so did our ability to build taller buildings. Now, basically, the taller the building, the higher risk is going to be provided. I mean, it's going to happen with inside the building. So you'll need to have better materials and better fire ratings for the taller buildings. So you have high risk for tall buildings, low risk for small buildings, which leads to better construction. So if you have a small house that's made of wood, you know that fire will spread from building to building or throughout the house very fast. But since you're only expecting a small amount of people to egress out of there, the code still allows for wood construction for a house. But if you try to build a 30-floor tower out of wood, the fire will spread too fast. And once it spreads, you won't have enough time to get everyone out. So you have to have better building materials such as steel and concrete construction. So Chapter 8 refers you to NFPA 220. Every building has to comply with one of the types of building types found in NFPA 220. So in a nutshell, you have type 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Type 1 being a construction type being concrete, which is really robust against fires. Then you go down to type 2, which is going to be steel construction. The steel could be either protected, as you see here, with fire foam, or unprotected, where the steel is just standalone. Next, you have type 3 construction, where it's a building that's used with partial wood. Type 4 construction, laminated wood is going to be the stronger beams, or your regular type 5 construction, which is just your basic lumber construction. So see how this applies in code. If you go to the healthcare occupancies, they'll have a section called construction type limitation. If I right here on the right, it's going to show you what construction type building that's been referenced, and then it'll show you the floors, how many floors you could build using these types. So if you see a type 5 building, it's going to be all wood. And so you'll see here, NP stands for not permitted. So you'll see that for healthcare occupancy, the code does not permit wood to be used. So if you go to the steel construction, unprotected steel says you can build up to 1 story, but you can't build above 1 story. Then if you protect the steel, you can build up to 3 stories, but you can't go up to 4 stories. And then if you build out of type 1, which is concrete, then you can go above 4 stories with concrete. So basically, the better the building material, the better the building material, the more lenient the code would be. So next we'll go over compartmentation. So compartmentation shows how fires is going to be contained in one area and not spread throughout the rest of the building. So we'll use this just as a sample floor plan. It's not a real building, but let's say this is a clinic space and the architect wanted, or healthcare facility, and the architect needed to separate it into smoke compartments. So smoke compartments, when you take an entire floor and you divide it into two separate compartments. So they would take this wall here. Once they build this wall, they will build this wall according to fire-rated construction practices, and it'll separate the building into two parts. That way, if there was a fire in this part of the building, everyone can egress to this section of the building, then get out of the fire in the danger zone. And this firewall would actually hold the fire and the effects of fire to one side of the building. So firewalls come in three different examples. You have fire barrier walls, which are usually going to be rated to resist fires for 2 hours or even more. And then you can have something as small as what's called a smoke partition. It may have some fire resistance rating, but it's not much. It's mainly provided to resist the passage of smoke. And then you have smoke barriers. Smoke barriers are generally 1 hour rated. So out of these three, I bet that even though they look the same, I call smoke partitions the Toyota class. The smoke barrier, since if you hold fire back for 1 hour, it'll be the Lexus class. And then fire barriers are really robust, so they'll be the rich Mercedes class of walls. Just show an example of some of this in code. In the business occupancies, there's a fire barrier must be provided between parking spaces and business occupancies. So the code requires the 2 hour fire resistance radius. So that's going to be your fire barriers or your Mercedes. And then in healthcare facilities, depending on how big all floors have to be divided in healthcare, divided into at least two compartments to limit fire and restrict the movement of smoke. And then if you look, if you start to go over 22,500 or every 22,500 square feet of healthcare, you'll have to provide a smoke compartment. Now, these smoke compartments these walls to create smoke compartments cannot be just designed and constructed based off of a contractor's own fruition. What you have to do is make sure that the contractor is following a wall system that's approved by ASTM, ANSI, or UL. So these UL, ANSI, and ASTM, they send these wall assemblies through various fire tests just to make sure they can perform in the way that we expect them to perform. And the rules for this is not just apply to walls, but it applies to floor construction and roof construction. Also, they apply to the fire doors that you find in these walls. They also have to go through leak tests to make sure too much smoke doesn't go from one part of the facility to the next. It applies to the elevator shafts, sometimes elevator lobbies if they're enclosed, atrium walls, corridors, and even the windows in these spaces. So next, it goes through special hazard protection. So we already talked about compartmentation. So special hazard protection, if we were storing, basically if we're storing something in this area that has a higher hazard than the rest of this clinic, then you would want to protect this area with fire-rated construction as well. And so the fire-rated construction areas, as I stated earlier, depending on what's inside of each room, you want to make sure that these rooms are enclosed with fire construction, sprinkler coverage, or both if it's a high hazard. So basically, that chapter 8, we talked about the building construction materials, concrete being the best material all the way down to wood. We talked about compartmentalizing an entire building and then hazardous separations for a building. So to apply this, I could show some results of an inspection that I was doing. So this is the building that we're housed in. This is the office portion of the building on the south. And then the top portion of the building is a storage occupancy. So I have business occupancy down here, storage occupancy up here, and there's a 2 hour wall that goes around the storage occupancy, separating it from the business portion. But inside of the storage occupancy, there's another business section there that's used for for offices that's actually inside of the storage occupancy. This is a picture of the office area and inside the office area. So you can see it's made of CMU walls or concrete walls. So that's going to give you good fire separation. But as I was doing my inspection, if you look at I looked at the roof, and the roof didn't seem too convincing that it had the actual correct separation. So I went in and looked above the ceiling, and I saw that we had unprotected steel there. So as I went to the code says we were supposed to have a separation between these two occupancies, and the separation had to be vertical, which is the wall, and horizontal, which is the roof. And then I went to the chart in chapter 6 and saw that the separation requirements between a business and a storage occupancy is actually 2 hours. And then both occupancies are sprinkled, so it's actually reduced to 1 hour. So I did a little checking in at PA 20 and basically found out that our walls are fine since they're constructed with concrete, but our roofs are not, the roof is not compliant within FPA. So instead of trying to put on a new roof for this area, we basically mitigated the situation by keeping high storage that would compromise the roof from being around the office area. So that's the back wall. You see the high storage for the racks have been removed, and those basically how typically how the storage is in the area. But another consideration, remember, we had 2 options. We could do separated construction or mixed occupancy construction. So we're trying to shoot for mixed occupancies, and under mixed occupancies, you can see here the architect provided 4 exits here, and then this area right here is used for lots of storage all in this area here. So when we check the travel distance from the backmost remote area, we found out it meets our travel distance, but there's a gate here. The gate can be locked at any moment, so it's not dependable. It's not a dependable egress route. Also, when you try to go to the other exit, it's too far. The travel distance exceeded the 300 feet. And then when we looked at the common path of travel, which is under business occupancy versus storage occupancy, the common path of travel exceeded 100 feet. So we could not use the mixed occupancy rule without making some changes. So the changes that were made is we reduced the amount of storage that we had in that area and opened up a pathway to the top, this north exit here. So now once we have the north exit provided, we have a new route that could be used that met all of the rules and criteria as the common path of travel. As soon as you step out the door, you'll have 2 ways out. And then this is within the 300 feet required. So we're able to use the mixed occupancy rules just by reducing the amount of storage. So in conclusion, we went through the building classification, which is really important, or the first step that you should do. We went through some of the means of egress requirements and started giving you the concepts for features of fire protection, which is how a building is going to be constructed. And this is going to apply to alterations, renovations, inspections, plan reviews, and emergency planning for your buildings. So do you have any questions before we exit on to our next presentation?
Cedric, excellent job. Any questions or discussion points? Cedric literally is a wizard with these presentations, as you could see. Cedric, we do have a couple things in the chat. One of the questions is, are university teaching labs and research labs both considered business occupancies?
Yes, so those are going to fall under business occupancies. You said research labs. If the research lab has such a high amount of flammables, it could actually be considered an industrial type occupancies, but it's just, if it's just a normal normal amount of lab work, then it's usually going to fall under the business occupancy.
Very good. Another question is, will evacuation elevators be required of new buildings, or would it be something required of all existing buildings to add?
Yeah, so it's going to apply to existing buildings and new buildings, those requirements. So you go to the occupancy chapter, and under the occupancy chapters, they have, like, I'll use business occupancy as an example. You have a chapter for new business occupancies, then you have a chapter for existing business occupancies. So if it's an existing building, you look under the requirements for existing building occupancies and just follow the rules there.
Excellent presentation, Cedric. I know you didn't tell everybody in advance, but I know you have an exam that everybody needs to take on all of this information at this point, right?
Right, we do have the,
No, we're just joking with everybody. We don't have any tests or exams here. We're going to shift over for the sake of time to our next presentation. Thank you so much, Cedric. And by the way, much of our asynchronous content adds on to all of this information that you saw here, okay? Take it away.
Good morning, everyone. So my name is Christopher Hall. Just kind of a brief something about myself. Myself, along with a couple of other colleagues that I have here. I used to work with the Health and Human Services side of safety. We're doing some life safety code inspections and so forth. Did that for about 5.5 years, and then made my way over here. Of course, that experience there proved to be extremely helpful when it came to doing nursing homes and also healthcare occupancies and things of that nature. Once I got over here, got into the educational side, academic side of things, and it's proven to be extremely helpful. Of course, one of the awesome roles that I had in the process of doing that is they call me a tunnel rat a little bit, because myself, along with one other fella here, we found ourselves in an attic space, 120-degree weather, of course, looking at sprinklers or for dry systems, wet systems, you name it, and also looking at fire protection systems that we'll talk about a little bit today. So just kind of wanted to give you that. Also, one of the things that I've always said as well, as Scott has told me to say at times, is, look, I'm a safety guy by day, but I'm also a clergyman 24/7. 24/7. One of the awesome things that I usually like to share with folks is that, look, I do fire prevention of all different sorts. So I'm glad to be a part of this presentation, and I hope that everything that I share today is helpful and useful for you. I'm going to try my best. This is not exhaustive. We're not going through every single topic, every single subject, but what we will do is just try to get you, just wet your palate a little bit, and hopefully I can answer any questions that you may have, and we can move forward from there. So what are we talking about today? Well, I'd like to share a little bit with you about active and passive fire protection systems. Snehal and also Cedric set the stage for this perfectly. And so I'm just there may be a little bit of redundancy, but I know that that'll be useful and helpful for you in the future. So we want to identify and talk about maintaining some of these active and passive fire protection systems. So here's the big question. What is active and passive fire protection system? Active fire protection systems usually take action in notifying occupants and putting out fires, while passive fire protection systems use systems that help prevent the spread of fire and smoke. So as we start to break this down a little bit, and I'll discuss, while this is not, I'm not going to go through every single topic here that you see that falls under the passive and active fire protection systems. But I am going to discuss a little bit of the technical side. So we'll talk about the sprinkler system, some of the operations of it, extinguishers, and also clean agent systems as well. We'll get into the organizational side. We'll talk a little bit about fire safety regulations. As we're discussing some of the technical items here, I'll present the regulations, not in full. I'm not trying to give you a full dissertation behind that. I'm just trying to make sure that you can link the regulation along with the specific operation or passive or active fire protection system. For the public side, we're going to talk a little bit about how the fire department does what it does and how the water supply gets into the building. I won't go into great detail about the fire alarm system itself, because I know Snehal did a great job with that, and we'll also discuss a little bit afterwards, but there will be a small slide in here about that. And then there'll be a little bit of redundancy along with a few other things talking about fire protection openings and how we can protect those. So let's see it. So as far as our active fire protection systems are concerned, there are at least 4 things that I'm going to discuss. The firefighter's role in this, the sprinkler system, the detection and alarm system, and also the suppression system. And specifically, we're talking about the fire extinguisher, okay? There's a threefold process here, or purpose here for the active fire protection system. One, of course, is to slow the process of the fire. Of course, we want to put out the fire. And of course, we want to also notify our occupants in the building about any fire that's in the area. If you happen to have a high-rise building, I believe there may be 70 or 75 feet or greater, or greater than 70 or 75 feet, you're gonna need a fire protection system, which is included in the fire alarm system, to notify individuals that there is a fire on that specific floor. Now, if there happens to be a fire, and I'm just using this as a demonstration, if there happens to be a fire on the 5th floor, said the alarm will go off on that floor to notify occupants, but you also will have an alarm that happens the floor above and also the floor below. It's not just for the middle section, it's for all floors. If you happen to have it on the 8th, I think you get the idea, then of course it'll sound on the 8th, it'll also sound on the 9th, and also on the 7th as well. So of course, this is going to get your alarm system working. It's going to initiate your fire alarm system. After it gets into the smoke detector, which is a part of that active fire protection, or if somebody manually pulls the fire pull station, which I need to go ahead and pause here for a second and say that the active fire protection side of this is not just automatic, but it's also manual. So we're looking for the actions of different sorts here. So as that occurs, there are also other actions that occur as well. So just want to give you guys a glimpse of what your offices typically look like here. So in a normal situation, if the fire goes off, the system is already going to have its everything in place. The wet pipe sprinkler system is going to have water that sits on the system, period. And I'll talk to you a little bit more about why I'm discussing this the way that I am. So as the water sits in the piping and the fire initiates on that specific floor. Now, this is not like Hollywood, and we'll talk a little short while about that, but that specific sprinkler that's impacted by that fire is going to go off. So, and when that happens, within a 90-second period, there's a chamber that's going to fill up in order to ensure that that fire also is alerted to the rest. The alarm is also alerting the rest of the occupants in that given space. Now, the sprinkler that you saw up there, I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. The sprinkler that you saw up there is your typical pendant type. Over to your left-hand side, my left-hand side, of course, there's just a breakdown of how the sprinkler works itself. That frangible bulb there, the glass bulb in between, it usually is about 155 degrees Fahrenheit for a normal educational occupancy or business occupancy. And once that bulb releases, it actually allows for the mechanism in there to drop, and the water that's sitting on the piping system comes out. If you can see over here, we have several different degrees. This 135 degree Fahrenheit system and this 135 degree Fahrenheit type of bulb here is really talking about not just the bulb, but also some of the fixtures that you've probably seen in your building before. And I'll discuss that in just a second. So you see you have your conventional type of sprinkler, your upright sprinklers. They're used in specific cases. For instance, if there's renovations going on, there are times when you're going to need to take your sprinklers that are typical pendant type, turn them upright so that they can help to cover everything in that given area. We have our recessed pendants. We even have sidewall pendants. Your typical pendant, as I discussed earlier, recessed pendant type and vertical sidewall. And this is probably some of the ones that you are accustomed to seeing as well, which is your concealed pendant type. These are the ones that I was saying is 135 degrees Fahrenheit, this particular count, but the actual bulb inside of this should go up to 155 degrees Fahrenheit. Some of these others, you would find the sprinkler with different colorings that would go in mechanical spaces that would have a higher rating, temperature rating, your garage areas. It just depends on the specific type of function that you need the head for. And this is just a handy dandy chart that you'll find over in NFPA 25 or 13. And it'll give you all the specific colors specific to that sprinkler head type. So just kind of moving on, again, I talked about the manual means by which we can help to put out fires. If you happen to have a training program in place where you are training your occupants to use portable fire extinguishers, This would be a great way to help educate not only your people in-house, but also those outside. So NFPA 10 is the standard that we use for portable fire extinguishers. To identify some of the hazard occupancies, we have light hazard, ordinary hazard, and high hazard. You can see they have specifics to those given hazards there. Offices, schools, assemblies, all of that falls under light hazard. Just a little quick something to talk about the different types, right? So you have your, which is the kind that we would usually see across our campuses, your ABC type. Now, the A stands for, of course, the original ordinary combustible fires. That's for your wood, your papers, your cloth. Flammable liquids would be your B type extinguishers. C would stand for the electrical type. D is for your combustible metal. And then you have your commercial cooking equipment, which is your K type extinguishers. You usually find those in the larger silver looking fire extinguishers. These are all usually found in your kitchen areas where there are grease fires. Just for a little operation of how these go, I know that you've passed this on to a lot of your occupants, the handy dandy PASS acronym that we throw out there to make sure that we can remember the function and operation of our fire extinguishers. So prior to the use of it, it's always good to make sure that everyone's looking at the gauge, making sure it's not undercharged, it's not overcharged, but rather that it's within the green. Said our first step is we want to pull the pin. Our second step is to aim at the base of the fire. And while the third step is squeezing, that last step is sweeping, which is essential to making sure that we extinguish that fire out at its core. So I wanted to break this down just a little bit. I know it may be a little hard to see. Please forgive me. I know that we can have some better imagery there, but you're looking at a typical standpipe system diagram here. To your left of this diagram, you have your large water storage tank, which is where a lot of our buildings that are high rises that'll need a little extra storage. Also, just in case we don't have water from the city or anything of that nature occurs, we have backup water in place in order to help continue to feed the fire protection system, the fire sprinkler system. Now, immediately coming off of that, we actually have two fire pumps. I always call the fire pump the heartbeat of the building. See, it's the thing that helps when the city pressure is not enough. We know that the fire pumps will help us to push that water up our high-rise buildings. And then we have our jockey pump that goes alongside with that to help for any small fluctuation of pressure so that the sprinkler is not just, or that the alarm is not just going off at the detection of any old water flow. So this is off to our side here. You can clearly see we have our hose cabinets, and we'll talk about this in just a little second here. So now it's very good. It would be very helpful, of course, if you're around your campus and you know your campus very well. Why? Because there are some times when we have combination systems where the wet pipe system feeds into the standpipe, and there are times when they are separate. So please know your system. There are wet pipe systems. There are also dry systems. Now, your wet pipe system, I talked to you a little bit earlier about that. That's where you have your water system, the water that sits on top of the system, ready for any fire that goes and melts away the frangible bulb within the regular pendant type sprinkler. Well, your dry systems are a little different. Dry systems are usually put in place in areas where you have freezing weather that can potentially come through. Some of you may have experienced, I know over in Texas, we had a huge freeze here that happened back in 2021. Well, it proved to be extremely helpful for us to have our dry system outside, as you can imagine. And so that was a case where we used the dry system. What I didn't mention on this particular slide is that there are also dry pendant type. Now, they don't completely serve the same way as dry systems do, but they do have the same concept. They are incorporated within the wet system, and dry pendant types usually are those that, while the wet system itself is above in a more insulated area, maybe the dry pendant drops down a little bit lower and it's exposed to freezing weather. And so we want to have that dry pendant, maybe about a 12 or 18-inch piece of piping along with the sprinkler at the end. Of course, if a fire causes that to go off, then it has a mechanism that drops and allows the water to fall in that specific area. We have our pre-action systems. This is a dual system. It has wet and dry to it. I'm sorry, it has water and also air to the system itself. Part of the reason that we use this is in areas that we don't want false alarms or false triggers to happen that would cause the water to damage any type of equipment that we may have. Sometimes you have some of our universities that'll use this in data centers. They'll use them in libraries or areas where they're trying to protect their equipment. There has to be one trigger, and then there has to be another trigger in order to allow for the water to flow. Then we have a deluge system. You don't normally see these on our campuses. This is probably the closest thing that you'll see to Hollywood, because while the system itself has heads on it, those heads do not have fungible bulbs. So if there is something that allows that system to go off, then every single head will go off. Like I said, that's the closest thing you'll find in Hollywood there. So just looking at these specific hose cabinets here, some of the typical things that you will find in them are your fire hoses. You see you have your valve here, you have your connection where the fire hose is supposed to go. Some of our buildings in the past have had fire hoses that are meant for the occupants. Well, we don't have that for, they call them class 1 type systems. In class 1 type systems, we don't allow for occupants to fight the fire, and we don't even train them in that regard, because we want the fire department to do what they do. Now, there are the class 2 and 3 that allows for that, but generally what you'll find in a lot of our business occupancies is that we have a class 1 type of system. And then, of course, some of you may have the fire extinguisher in there as well. So I'm going to jump outside for just a second, and you'll see how this all comes together. We have our fire hydrants that are in place. Many of you have your fire hydrants there, along with the valve that's not too far away from it. It should be right in the vicinity. So these will be used for your fire department. So just bring up some of the code. NFPA 24, for those of you who have private fire hydrants on your campus, NFPA 24 is used for installation, as well as NFPA 1 for you to know exactly some of the codes you need to adhere to. So we have valves shall be clearly identified and free of obstruction, no bushes or anything of that nature, just blocking off our area. The center of the hose outlet shall not be less than 18 inches, but no more than 36, say above final grade. Just we want to make sure we have a 36-inch clear space around it, that circumference there, and the hydrants and connections shall be accessible to the fire department. I would also include in that we don't want to have anything that is caught and dislodged within the fire hydrant orifice there. Sometimes caps can be taken off, stolen, and things of that nature. For those private hydrants that we talked about just a moment ago, sometimes we have our hydrant dry barrels and walls and all kinds of other equipment that needs to be inspected. Well, you can do that according to NFPA 24, and this is just a handy dandy chart for helping you to know some of the ITMs that you can keep, that you can provide for upkeep. So I just wanted to show you this, just a culmination of some of the things that we were talking about already with regard to the fire department, and also some of the fees that are coming in. First things first, said the feed that comes into your system, as some of you may or may not know, said it comes from that city line there. So we have our city water supply. As it comes within your building, the water that's sitting on your system or that coming in from the city is a static water pressure underneath. And we have our butterfly valve there, if you can look at the very bottom. And then it traverses to the outside. And this is your fire department connection, ready for your fire department to use. So now, the fire hose cabinet, typically found close near your stairwells. And also, I believe it could be about 200 or 250 feet apart from that specific space, but definitely near your stairwells. Why? Because this is exactly where your fire department is going to be trying to go up and down and continue to try to fight certain fires. So as the fire department comes to your campus, once they've been dispatched by your university police or what have you, they'll go through this process. They'll, of course, have their fire department pumper. They'll hook up to your fire hydrant. The fire hydrant hooks up to their pumper. Your pumper goes into your fire department connection. The fire department also goes to that specific floor that's going to be taking care of the fire. They're going to connect to that hose, and then they're going to do what they have to do to fight off that specific fire. And that's usually how the process goes. So some handy dandy helpful things. NFPA 25, Chapter 5 is going to be used for helping you to maintain and have some of the ITMs taken care of there. And it goes into everything from valves to gauges, all the way to low point drains that most of us don't even give attention to. It gets into everything. So for us specifically, we have quarterly inspections that we do, as well as annual inspections that we do. We just came off of our 5-year inspection that we do, and it takes a great deal of coordination and time to make sure that everybody is on the same page. Something that I also wanted to mention, earlier we talked about the pre-action system, said that allows for air and water to be on the system. Well, for those of you who also want to take it up a notch and take care of your data centers or any kind of rare books collection rooms, we have our special suppression systems that are solely intent on taking away the oxygen from that space, which also creates much of a hazard for those that are within that area. But there's also 2 triggers for this type of system as well. So this type of system ultimately has the ability to start to decrease the oxygen in that space, so that it takes away that 3-leg. It takes away 1 leg of the fire triangle that some of you may know about. This is where you have your fuel, your heat, and of course your ignition source there. So it takes away that oxygen away from it, so that it has the capacity to fight fires effectively. Okay, so just jumping into our passive fire protection systems, some of this was a little redundant, so I'm going to make sure that I talk about it very briefly and try to get you to some of the more things that we didn't discuss. We're going to talk about firewalls, smoke and fire doors, smoke and fire dampers, and also some fire stopping techniques that we can use. So what is passive fire protection? Passive fire protection is a group of systems that compartmentalize a building through the use of fire resistance rated walls, floors, ceilings, and also joints, I would even say. So this is where all of your joints are protected as well. So just some data. The National Fire Protection had some statistics back in 2011 and 2015. Said the U.S. Fire Department responded to an estimated average of nearly 5,000 structure fires in educational properties in 2011 and 2015 annually. These fires caused annual averages of 1 civilian death, 70 civilian fire injuries, and 70 million in direct property damage. Now, of course, we have all these different statistics that are given to us to help us to know exactly what fires are doing in our buildings and to our people. So, but one of the big things that I wanted to discuss is right over here on this chart. While it talks about everything from causes to origin, it also brings out a very important note about passive fire protection systems that we need to consider. How about this? 94% of fires in these properties were confined to the room of origin. So I would go on record and say that this is because these specific fires likely were held back by passive fire protection systems. All right. So some of the things that Cedric was discussing earlier, construction types and materials consist of gypsum, concrete, CMU blocks, and of course our floors, which is steel, concrete, and wood frame structures. I wanted to just give this to you because it would be extremely helpful if you have it on hand. If you have floor plans that are able to help you to identify these specific areas, it would be great for not only yourself, but also those other safety individuals that will be coming after you. So one of the things that you want to ensure that they have on the life safety legend is dealing with the smoke barrier, fire partitions, fire barriers, anything of that nature, and even identifying some of those hazardous areas as well. So if you look in here, you'll be able to make those links and also know exactly where those rated walls need to be so that you don't have to worry about those signages that are put above over areas that don't even need a required fire rating. So just to kind of talk very quickly, very briefly about these different type of walls and barriers that were discussed a little bit earlier. So as we look at smoke partitions, notice that smoke partitions have the ability to take care of all of your primary areas of egress. Now, these don't necessarily have to be fire rated walls, but they do have to have some type of limitation of smoke going from one area to the next. Primarily, we're talking about those corridors, those exit accesses that people need in order to get to the fire barriers. So it's just any type of construction. You're talking about acoustical ceiling tiles, or it can be a monolithic type ceiling that's made of gypsum, anything of that nature. What about our smoke barrier walls? So smoke barrier walls usually go from one end of the building to the other end of the building. They have the capacity of going from floor to ceiling, and they are completely fire rated, 1, 2, possibly 3 hours. So, and it'll continue to provide, as Cedric was talking about a little bit earlier, that protection on one side so that people can flee to the other side and have all the time that they need in order to exit the building or let the fire department do what they need to do. Now, fire barriers are a little different. This is actually one of our buildings on campus here. So fire barriers usually go from floor all the way to roof deck, or it may very well have that proper protection at the floor and also at the ceiling, as we saw during Cedric's presentation. And this particular floor plan that you have here, we have all of our stairwells are considered fire barriers, and these are mechanical spaces that traverse the building all the way from the floor to the ceiling. Every single wall, every single area on these fire barriers has to be protected via code. So we have hazardous waste storage, stairwell enclosures. We even have confined spaces that sometimes need to be fire rated. Now over to your left-hand corner, up and to the left, you'll see that I have this double doors. Now this is actually going from one building to the other building. This is what you would call your horizontal exit. And we have right here called the firewalls. Now, the reason that we have these firewalls here is because it's not just protecting one side of the building and compartmentalizing one side of the building to the other side of the building. The firewalls are usually those things that are going from one side of one other building to another building. I'll usually call these the arms of God. So because it's so high you can't get over it, so low you can't get under it, so wide you can't get around it. That's usually how firewalls are constructed. And they can go all the way up to 4 hours fire rating. So as we're here and looking at the fire rated areas, notice that every area has to have some type of labeling so that you can quickly identify it, or for any type of contractors who we know are always attentive to some of the signage that we have on our walls. So we usually want to have those signages there in place to make sure that we know exactly what that rating is, whether 1, 2, or 3. For fire rated doors, there's all type of labeling that needs to be put on there. Say sometimes it can be 1.5, 1 hour, or 3.5 hours worth. Say please look for your labeling there so that it's not painted over as you're doing inspections. This is always the seal. Classified UL listing here. Whenever you see this, you know that there is a legitimacy to the fire rating on that door, or even glazing. So sometimes you have wire glass there that's used. Please look for your classified UL listing. If it's not there, then you're probably gonna need to go back and take a good look at whether it's allowed or not. So to just kind of discuss, notice that the hardware on your fire rated door here has some specific type of information on there. It may very well be something that was used on another door before, and you have to be mindful of this because sometimes we have panic hardware, but on fire doors, it needs to be specifically fire hardware that's used. So what about our fire and smoke dampers that are used in a lot of our openings? So smoke dampers are usually automatic. They trigger, they set off when the fire alarm sets off. They're automatically closed upon any detection of smoke that's found in the air ductways as the duct detectors or smoke detectors go off. We also have our fire dampers that are a little different. They're not necessarily, if they're standalone and they're not a combination of fire and smoke dampers. The fire damper itself, if a fire goes off, much like with the sprinkler in a sense, the frangible bulb that's found there at 165 degrees Fahrenheit, once it melts away, the door shuts and it limits the passage of fire as well as smoke. There's different types. You have your curtain, your multi-blade, your single blade profile, and also you have your true round. These are different types of air ducts that are used. And I just want to go ahead and make a note. I believe under doors, it was NFPA 80 that we use as a code reference in order to know how to install. And also for our smoke detectors and our fire and smoke dampers, I believe it could be NFPA 105 as well as NFPA 90A that's used to know how to effectively do ITM. So what about our fire stop systems? If you've ever seen fire stop material that's used in a lot of these different types of openings, and you can have them from a bundled cable all the way to just random openings. Sometimes it can be just a misuse of how fire stop systems were done before. Well, fire stop materials specifically are tested and approved for use in specific construction details that reflect the installed assembly itself, meant to protect the rated protections, whether it's pipe, wires, cables, or anything like that, to the same degree as the fire-rated wall, ceiling, or floor that's being protected. Looks like we had a question there. I did miss that. I know we'll come back around to it. So if you can see this here, this is something that we commonly found out in the field. A lot of people like to go to your local Home Depot and grab some of the fire caulking that's used to kind of pin up these areas. The question is can this be used? Absolutely not. If you look on those containers, it always has a little disclaimer there that says not for commercial use. And I'd also argue that it's not going to be beneficial for what we're trying to do as well. Some fire stop applications. You can see that there's a myriad of things here, whether it's just hard piping or whether it's insulation. Every type of penetration has a specific fire stop detail, which leads me to this. I wanted to show you this to give you an idea of how some of the fire stop details are when you're going in and trying to identify specifics on how to apply your fire stop. So under this specific one, we have the first one that talks about wall assembly. So it identifies the type of wall that's being used, whether it's gypsum, CMU, anything. The type of product that's penetrating that area. In this example, it's a metallic sleeve. We have cables. Well, I was jumping ahead on you guys, I'm sorry. And then of course, the last thing that we have here is the specific type of fire stop application that you want to put in place. Can you see a lot of different colors out there? I promise you, you can. They have blue, yellow, they have the whole rainbow out there. Usually they don't look for these to be combined. I've seen where they try to combine them. They don't test them like that. And so they don't require you to do it like that. They would rather you not. And this is why I brought this up here. So as they do testing, this is the whole stream test. Earlier you heard Cedric talk about the ANSI and also UL testing that's done. Well, here in the Houston area, there was a Rector Seal facility that I visited some years ago, and they go through the process of putting different types of equipment, different types of material in, and they put the hose test to it to ensure that it's able to withstand any type of pressure as well as heat. That metal rod there was heated up to, I believe, 400 degrees Fahrenheit as they were doing that specific test. And this is just kind of the end result of it. One had insulation, one had pure piping, and one held very, very well, while the other was actually compromised. So at the end of the day, we have all of our systems here. So just giving you a quick run through again. So for passive fire protection systems, they're stationary materials designed to prevent the spread of fire and smoke, while active fire protection systems, they are always taking action. Passive fire protection systems help keep the fire in its original area, therefore stopping the spread of fire through to the other side of the building. These systems, for the active side, they deploy once fire, smoke, or heat is detected. Then these systems are designed to help combat the fire and help put it out. And lastly here, these fire protection systems are typically built into your building. We're talking about passive fire protection systems, whereas active fire protection systems are typically installed based on certain legal criteria such as occupancy and building size. So I know most folks always say active versus passive. Well, really it's active and passive because they ultimately work together interdependently to form their formidable fire system. Said, thank you all. I know I saw some questions out there.
Yeah, Christopher, great job. 2 questions came in. First one is, if you have a chemical fume hood equipped with fire suppression system, how are these tested?
A chemical fume hood equipped with a fire protection system? Say like a sprinkler system, sprinklers is in that system? Is that where they were going?
Yes.
Okay. How would you do what again? I'm sorry.
How would you test that fire suppression system?
Hi,
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
this is Linda Vidura. We actually have some hoods. They don't have sprinklers.
Mm-hmm.
They have some sort of like, I think it's dry chemical fire suppression system. And I'm not aware these have been tested. So I wanted to know how you guys test those if you actually have them.
No, there's something that's coming to mind as you're saying that. Is it much like your kitchen range hoods in a sense? Have you ever dealt with the kitchen range hood? What it has is a dry chemical component to it, so that if a fire does go off, it melts away the fusible link, and it engages. Of course, it has a manual pull to it as well. So that's what I'm kind of getting when I hear what you're saying. I would have to go back to actually check to see how those specific areas are maintained. That was a really good question.
We'll find out for you and give you an answer here.
And that's
Second
chemical fume hood.
Yep. And then the second question, is there a requirement to have fire dampers installed inside of a fume hood?
No.
Inside of the fume hood duct. Excuse me.
No, it's not necessarily, and unless you're going through a barrier or anything of that nature. So you definitely. And as I'm kind of going through the files of my mind, I know that there are, and you might want to go back and double check this within the code, but there are systems that allow for you not to have a damper, but it depends on, try to see the best way to say it. It depends on the type of duct system that you have in place that may be able to limit that passage of smoke from getting out into your area. So I would have to go back and give you a very definite answer, but it gets a little technical. I've always encouraged people, put the damper in, make sure that that's in place to limit the passage of fire at the wall. But there are systems that allow you to do it, that allow you to omit it.
All right, guys, thanks for the questions. We're going to take a 5-minute break here. I've got 12:17. Why don't we make it 12:25 Central Standard Time? So we'll take 8 minutes of a break. Go stretch your legs, take a bio break, and we'll see you guys back in 8 minutes. We're going to transition over to occupational safety basics. Christopher Hall, thank you very much. All right, guys, we're back. Give you another 30 seconds or so, and we're going to get started with the occupational safety section of the presentation. Hope you guys have enjoyed everything so far. That fire and life safety stuff, we really felt strongly that we'd spend some extra time on those presentations because they're so universal across our different buildings and campuses. And whether you do fire and life safety full time or you're in one of the other safety disciplines, going into labs, clinics, classrooms, offices, whatever, it's pretty much universally applicable. So we wanted to spend the time on that. Snehal, I'm going to kick this back over to you for the occupational safety basics. And just so everybody knows, we have a long list of really good presentations on various different occupational safety topics, which are going to be available to you asynchronously. So please look through all of that information over the course of the week and chime in on our discussion board about any questions or discussion for each of those topical areas. We would have loved to have had time to go through each and every one of those, but simply not practical on this virtual format. So take it away, Snehal, and then enjoy all the presentations asynchronously for the rest of the topics.
All right, thank you, Scott. Again, as Scott mentioned, there's a lot of material to be covered, and the occupational safety, we're going to have a lot of asynchronous materials for you guys. So please be sure to take a look at it and ask any questions that you'd like. I'm going to do a quick overview on occupational safety. So these are hazards associated with your workplace and your university environment, and some best practices to control them. Key elements for well-functioning health and safety communities, and then basic legal requirements for health and safety in your workplace. So for occupational safety, some principles. Employers responsible for maintaining a safe and healthy workplace. Employees should have a voice in developing policies and programs. And then leadership and employees should be integral in developing policies and programs and create best practices, policies to protect personnel from hazards. The most important thing is having buy-in from your key stakeholders and having leadership along the way supporting you at all times. If you have any opposition from either leadership or your other key stakeholders, occupational safety and safety in general just doesn't work real well. So some of the hazards of occupational safety: physical hazards, noise, temperature, extreme temperatures, biological hazards across campus and in your university workplace, and then chemical and dust hazards for grinding, construction, painting, ergonomic hazards, repetitive work. So if you are doing something, or a contractor is doing something, or one of your individuals is doing something that's a regular repetitive motion. And then safety hazards, just hazards due to not proper upkeep of the areas. So according to BLS, or Bureau of Labor Statistics, if you look at these two things, one of the things that's obvious is during 2020, March of 2020 is when everyone went into COVID lockdown. You saw a slight drop in both fatal injuries and then also total number of injuries. But now that number is coming back up as people are going back into work. So the thing that you can do that will help the most is by eliminating whatever hazard it may be, whether it's biological, chemical, you name it. Whatever the hazard may be, you want to eliminate that hazard if possible. But obviously, due to the job task or whatever you're working on, or the individual is working on, you cannot eliminate that task or that particular hazard. And so what ends up happening is substitution is going to be the next option. And then if you can't substitute it, then having an engineering control in place where you're isolating people from the hazard itself, so separation. And then administrative control, changing how you do the work or how the employee does the work. And then the last and the least effective method is going to be providing PPE. And that's because sometimes people forget to wear it improperly, etc. But again, elimination is the most effective all the way down to the least effective, which is PPE. And so for all occupational safety, you want to try to eliminate. And then if that is not possible, go down to the PPE. So for engineering controls, this is going to be control at source, but does not remove or eliminate the hazard itself. Some examples are mechanical guards, like machine guarding, wet methods for dusting. So if you are working with dust, you want to make sure that you are wetting it down. Enclosures and isolation. When abatements are taking place, they will put up enclosures, and they'll also use a wet method for removing asbestos. Dilution and ventilation. And then again, I'll use asbestos as an example because this kind of falls in all of these. You want to have proper ventilation, making sure that the HVAC system is shut off in the area so it doesn't blow dust back up within the building or space. And then also having ventilation or proper ventilation for the workers or individuals within the containment. Proper equipment, making sure that if a tool isn't available, get the correct tool needed. And then ergonomic design of tools and equipment. It is very important. There's a lot of new ergonomic tools and equipment that are available, including mouse and keyboards. And it is sometimes well worth the cost to invest in ergonomic design of such things. And then appropriate airflow and exhaust. Some administrative controls, changes in work procedures such as written safety policies, rules, schedule changes such as lengthen or additional rest breaks, job rotation, adjusting the work pace. By doing these administrative changes, you can minimize injury or the hazard itself. So for example, an ergonomic injury could take place if you don't do these things, but by enacting a short break every hour or at some frequency thereof, you'll minimize or mitigate the risk. Training with the goal of reducing the duration, frequency, and severity of exposure to hazards. So it's important by educating your individuals to let them know, first of all, what the hazard or hazards are, and then second of all, what they can do to mitigate those hazards. So controls, PPE, clothing, eye protection, hearing protection, respiratory protection. This is all at the worker. This is, once you've educated the worker and letting them know the hazards, they can prevent additional occupational risks by using the correct type of PPE. And as part of the training, understanding how and when to wear it. So for example, you don't go into a hazard and then put on your mask. You want to put it on before you enter that area. So training and education is a big piece of PPE use. So some elements of an occupational safety program, management commitment and employee involvement. So not only do you want to have leadership and personnel educated on this, they both have to have a buy-in so they can understand why there's a need for the occupational safety and the changes that they have to do, whether it's PPE, engineering controls, or whatnot. Worksite analysis. So regular and frequent worksite analysis, especially if something changes, if there's a remodel, a tool that's brought in, a new procedure, you want to make sure that the job site is looked over again to make sure that there are no hazards or new hazards that have come up. Hazard prevention and control. Essentially, again, this is what can you do or what can the worker do to mitigate those particular hazards. And then safety and health training. Again, education is very important, and training, regular training to reinforce the hazards and what they can do to mitigate those hazards. Employer and employee are the most important piece for occupational safety and safety in general. Top management involvement should be visible and have authority and resources to implement a program. If you have everybody wanting to do something, but there's no funding, no money, it doesn't work sometimes, because you do need to invest in providing safety, whether it's PPE or changes in engineering controls or getting new equipment. It's very important that that there is funding available for this. And then employee involvement in the program and in decisions that affect their safety and health should be encouraged. So you and leadership shouldn't have to make the program without bringing in the actual worker that's involved, because the worker may have a different take on it, or they may be able to provide or shed light on something that you weren't aware of completely. And so this is a very important piece to have the worker, leadership, and yourself available when working to create a program or update or modify a program. Management commitment and employee involvement. A clearly stated worksite policy should be established and communicated with specific goals and objectives. All aspects of the program should have assigned responsibility and accountability. So the leadership needs to know what their role is. The worker needs to have responsibility or obligations. And then same thing with safety. Safety needs to also know where they stand as far as surveys go, follow-up goes, communication piece. policy making, which everyone should be part of in helping develop a program. Program operations need to be reviewed at least annually to evaluate and make revisions as needed. Sometimes what happens is a program will go unchecked for many years, and you'll find out that items or processes are no longer in place. And so you want to make sure that you are annually revisiting those programs. Worksite analysis, identify all existing hazards and conditions that might create new hazards. So if there's something that is a new hazard with the introduction of a new policy, tool, equipment, or person, make sure that you are realizing that and educating everyone accordingly. An efficient program includes actively analyzing the work and the work site to anticipate and prevent harmful occurrences. Not only is it important to realize that, hey, this is part of the problem, or this could be a problem, but also in the future, say, for example, if somebody goes from point A to point B and they're walking through a warehouse full of moving machinery, obviously that's a hazard that could occur. So make sure that you are able to foresee potential hazards that are similar and kind of eliminate those or minimize those as well. For hazard prevention and control, triggered by determination that a hazard or potential hazard exists, when practical, prevent hazards by effective design of job or job site. This is probably one of the best things to do if you have the funding or money for it, because by just changing a job site, you can eliminate that particular hazard. Where elimination is not feasible because it's maybe cost prohibitive, control hazards to prevent unsafe and unhealthy exposure. And then elimination or control must be accomplished in a timely manner. So if you do find a deficiency or during a risk assessment, you are able to identify something, make sure that you communicate that right away and create a program in place and educate everyone that is part of that process. For occupational safety training, address the safety and health responsibilities of all personnel. Make sure that there's nobody that's unchecked or is missed. It might be a housekeeping staff. It might be a student intern that comes in once in a while. Make sure that you're not missing anybody that is not regularly there. Ensure all employees understand the hazards to which they may be exposed and how to prevent harm to themselves and others. And then educate and reinforce management's role in safety and health responsibilities with leadership. And again, sometimes when you put a program or policy in place and you put the responsibility solely on the worker and EHS, leadership no longer, and you take leadership out of the equation, you want to make sure that leadership also has some follow-up involved, like, hey, this you need to wear your PPE or your goggles, or don't do this process, don't throw this away in the trash, or don't put these sharps where somebody could get injured. We've had in the past, or recently, in one of the buildings where sharps were getting placed in regular trash, and housekeeping was injuring themselves because somebody was putting sharps in. And so they had to clamp down on that with a different process. And so anytime something happens, make sure that everyone has some sort of understanding of what their role and responsibility is. Record keeping, make sure that that you are keeping good records of everything. It is a requirement for under OSHA, but for the most part, we keep records at least 10. I'm sorry. If you have more than 10 workers, you need to keep a log of injuries and illnesses. And this is what an OSHA log looks like. Again, make sure that you are maintaining adequate logs of injuries and illnesses caused by the workplace. And make sure that they have access to medical records in the event that they do need it, questionnaires, results, lab tests, and any other important information. Hazards communication standard to ensure that employers and employees know about work hazards and know how to protect themselves so that the incidence of illness and injuries due to hazardous chemicals is reduced. Again, this HAZCOM standard is required to minimize injury and death. Occupational exposure to hazardous chemicals in the laboratory. make sure that you have a chemical hygiene plan in place that is capable of protecting employees from health hazards associated with hazardous chemicals in the lab, capable of keeping exposures below the limits as required, and then make sure that you have an SOP, standard operating procedure, employee training again, and whoever your chemical hygiene officer is, make sure that they are regularly revisiting this. And then these plans should be readily available to employees and employees' representatives in the event they have any questions on it. Bloodborne pathogen standard, prevent needle sticks and other exposure at work to blood and body fluids that contain blood. And again, these are the responsibilities of the employer. Asbestos Hazard Emergency Response Act, or AHERA. And again, for any type of work where you have asbestos, you need to make sure that, or employers need to make sure that the management plan exists for the location, conduct regular inspections and assess conditions of the asbestos-containing building material, or ICBM, provide training for custodial staff on a regular basis, and then cover state and local workers who perform asbestos work who aren't covered by OSHA. So make sure that any individuals that are working around asbestos, or if you have asbestos in your building, make sure that it is that you have a plan in place. In summary, OSHA provides the minimum expected of workplaces, educate and train employees and personnel. Again, leadership is the key, working with them, and then also the workers. Use the most effective control method when possible. Revisit processes and hazards regularly, and as new hazards or job duties change, and then timely follow up on incidents and maintain accurate records. Aside from that, does anyone have any questions right now? Before I move on to machine guarding. Unfortunately, we're not going to get to go to all the occupational safety learning, but they will all be available for you on the asynchronous learning site. But we are going to talk about machine guarding because each and every one of your campuses has some type of machine that requires some type of guard or protection. All right, Darris Peace is going to go ahead and talk about machine guarding. Thank you.
Okay, good morning, everybody. This will be the last presentation for the day. As Snehal just mentioned, unfortunately, we will not be able to go through all of the presentations. And hopefully we have a few minutes left, so we'll try to get through this, and hopefully we won't go over time here. Just to give a brief background, my name is Darris Peace. I graduated from Bryan University with a bachelor's in architecture. Started out as a volunteer firefighter for the fire department, and then moved on with the state of Texas as a life safety code surveyor with Health and Human Services. But at the time when we started out, it was called Department of Aging and Disability Services. And our job was mainly to go out and look at healthcare facilities and just look out for any safety items, because they were governed by federal and state agencies, and they had regulations and federal rules that they needed to follow. And so some of the main things we did look into was fire alarm systems, sprinkler systems, generator systems. We looked at hallway clearances and smoke barrier walls and such. And now, thankfully, I am here with UT Health to further along my learning process and to see what else I can learn. So today, without further ado, we'll just jump right into it. We're going to go into machine guarding, which is an important topic. Sorry, I see it moving a little slow here. So just to kind of start off, there's a little history behind this. So when it comes to machine guarding, before the Industrial Revolution, most people, as we know, kind of worked in little mom and pop shops where we deal with hand tools and such items like that, where people might have just had little nips and cuts here and there. But as the Industrial Revolution began, people were beginning to be introduced to these large machines, trains, and all kind of manufacturing machines that people were not really aware of. And these caused a lot of problems because people were very, not really trained on how to operate these machines. So we had a lot of incidents where people's limbs were getting cut off and even fatalities. And some of the sad things about it too is that they even had children, young as 4 years old, working in some of these factories as well, who even some of them were losing limbs and losing their lives as well. And so because of this kind of situation and other situations, you might have seen it on History Channels where back in some of the early 20s or so, you might have seen guys working on top of buildings and they had no kind of fall protection or anything. And there was a lot of deal of people falling from certain heights. So because of these reasons, that's why OSHA was signed in December 29th of 1970 by President Nixon. And so OSHA played a part in able to get out to these job sites and construction sites and to begin to implement safety factors that need to be taken care of so that people can be safe and hopefully people can get back to their homes and get back to their loved ones safely. So the next clip we're going to have is just a small video about just the dangers of machines and what can possibly be done. We're not going to watch the whole video because of the sake of time, but we're just going to get a little glimpse of how dangerous machines can be. And I do want to apologize. There may be a couple of little videos in here that may be a little bit too much, but hopefully not too much that you cannot watch.
Nicola Hustleby is a regular on this bench, waiting each morning to take the bus for breakfast.
I was just sitting there, drinking coffee, smoking a cigarette, which I do, and bam, all of a sudden I was just jolted and thrown in the street.
Nicola said it happened so fast she didn't see it coming. The arm of the City of Rochester garbage truck picked up the bench and threw her off.
I realized I was okay. I said, well, let's walk. I mean, at least I'm in a hospital. But I still have pain in my elbow, right? It was very deep, the cut in the incision.
Nicola.
So as you can see in this video clearly how dangerous machines can be, and just as for your own personal deal, if you want to, you can go home and just kind of make up your own idea. How would you solve that situation, or what can you do to make that situation better so that doesn't happen again? And what safety measures would you take to prevent such a thing like that from happening to anybody, that especially any of your loved one that we know of? So when it comes to machine guarding, OSHA typically they have cited at least about 800 fatalities and approximately 18,000 amputations and crushing injuries and lacerations each year because of unsafe machine guarding. And some of the 3 leading causes of work-related injuries treated in the emergency department were, we have trips and falls or overexertion of the bodily reaction. But one of the main ones, again, is contact with objects and equipment. So here we have a law firm here in the state of Texas, Ramsey Law Group, and typically he's a type of law firm where a lot of workers who have been injured on the job because of lack of safety precautions or safety measures, he deals with trying to handle their situation and making sure that they're getting accommodated correctly. But one of the issues that he runs into, as you can clearly see, is that at the top here, he calls out caught in running equipment or machinery, which is one of the most concerns and causes that he deals with. But there are other 4 items on this list as well that deals with machinery items as well. Now, OSHA has a series of about 5 different type of violations that they have. Now, one of them is called a serious violation. Now, a serious violation is finally, there's a situation on the job site, whether it be a manufacturer or a construction site, and there is a hazard that the worker may be aware of or may not be aware of, but it's still a situation and it can cause hazardous conditions and it can cause a life. Now, when we look at the serious violations, according to OSHA 2021, machine guarding fell at number 10. Now, that's a serious violation. But the next violation we have is what he calls a willful violation. Now, willful violation is typically where the company knew that there was a problem, they saw it, they were cited for it, but they still failed to do anything about it. Or it can be a situation of they knew that they were sending a worker into a particular area without the proper PPE that they should be wearing. And it's clearly that number jumped from 10 all the way up to number 2, just saying how many companies out here are actually doing things of this type of action. So we're going to jump into this a little bit. We're going to talk about machine guarding, what it's going to protect us from. We're going to look at machine motion. We're going to look at machine guards. We're going to look at machine action. We're going to look at safety devices. And we're going to look at safe work practices. So once again, I apologize if I kind of moved through a little quickly. We're just trying to move along for the sake of time here. So OSHA, protection from. We definitely want to protect ourselves from sparks. We know that sparks can burn the skin, it can get into the eyes, and can cause all kind of other issues as well. We also want to deal with flying particles, and these are just machines that are doing some type of cutting or shearing or so, and particles can easily fly off into someone's eyes. We want to deal with kickbacks, and that's for a lot of people who have worked in the wood shop or so may have experienced this before. We want to deal with moving appendages. As you seen in the video earlier, this is what we would call a moving appendix. or another word also, articulated motion. They kind of run hand in hand, but we'll get into that a little bit later. And another one that we want to be careful of is nip points. And these are little gears and joints that can cause your fingers or hands to either get pinched or cut off or get caught up. So sparks, one of the issues with sparks, as we know, is that they can burn the eyes, they can burn the skin. If sparks are flying out in the area that you're working at, it can cause fires if it lands on some kind of combustible material. But one of the issues also that we want to look out for is that anytime sparks are being emitted, what we want to be careful is that we want to watch out for the area in particular to make sure that there are also, if there's any gas line or gas pipes, we want to make sure that those are kept off or the gas is cut off. So in this video here, here's a young man who was getting ready to start sparking, but they did not check for anything improperly, and there was evidently a gas leak, and whoosh, a fire erupts. So there are certain precautions and measures that we need to take before we get into anything that is dealing with sparks. Should have cut this down a little. So these are in-house, what we call outreach programs where guys are going to use it. And you can see that they're taking certain precautions. They have the red shield up to try to prevent the sparks from flying out onto any kind of combustible material. We have another young man who's sweeping the area to make sure that the sparks are not laying there and that could possibly flame up. The young man who was doing the welding has on his PPE. He's making sure that he is not looking directly into the spark itself. However, unfortunately, there are some other issues going on here that are some hazards, which we did address after we took this video. When we're dealing with kickbacks, kickbacks typically occurs when people are in a wood shop and they're using what's called a saw blade. And so as they're moving that little wood along the saw, sometimes that saw kind of picks up the wood and it'll kick the wood right back onto a person, which we see this individual, unfortunately, have to experience here. And with these teeth running about 120 miles an hour, I mean, these wood pieces can shoot back pretty fast. So some of the precautions that we take from this is one, they have what they call a riving knife. And so that helps as the wood comes along, it'll help keep the wood down and not kick back up or not pop up. And then also another one that they have a splitter, which kind of works in the same or similar fashion. Earlier, as we saw, we were talking about moving appendages. Moving appendages are very dangerous because they're very articulated. Sometimes you don't know exactly which way that an arm is going to move. So one of the ways that we want to protect that is by putting a barrier around the moving appendage. We're going to get into a little bit of machine action and some of the actions that's taken. So one we have is cutting. Another one we have is shearing, and which can be dangerous as well. As you see, this child is getting ready to pop off. Another one we have punching and pressing, and we also have machine bending. Computer's moving a little bit slower than I thought. Next, we'll get into a little bit about machine motion. So we have rotation. We have what we call reciprocation, where the machine is moving back and forth. We have transverse motion. And then once again, similar to that of moving appendages, we have what they call articulated motion. These are robotic arms that are articulate in style. They pretty much move on their own or move the way they're programmed to move. So when it comes to rotation, these type of machines are very dangerous in such a way because when you're around these type of machines, a couple of things you want to look out for is to make sure that you're not wearing any type of loose clothing, because as this machine is spinning, if you have any kind of loose clothing or loose hair, as you can see, that can easily get caught up or easily catch and just pull a person right in. Another issue with spinning motion is that you want to make sure that you're wearing your proper PPE as well. Have some kind of safety goggles on or have some kind of guard to make sure those flying particles won't pop out at you. Next, we have reciprocation, which is a back and forth movement of a machine. Some machines have a lot of power, as we already know, so you definitely don't want to be standing in the way of that. So once again, we want to provide some kind of barrier so that a person does not get trapped or caught up in a reciprocating type of machine. Next, we have transverse motion. Transverse motion that you've seen before. These are typical machines that you've seen probably in car lots. Well, excuse me, not car lots, but you'll see, I'm sorry, y'all, there's a little problem here. it's not acting right. You've seen machines like this in factories or so, where basically it's just a forward motion machine. And once again, it's another type of device that you want to be careful of. You definitely don't want to have any kind of loose clothing or loose jewelry when working in these machines, and we'll get into some of these protective measures later. And then we have articulated motion, which is similar to the movement appendage. It's just a robotic arm that you want to stay clear of. As you can see, this man here, and this would be more of a movement appendage, but as you can see here, since there's no barrier around this tract or whatever seems to be malfunctioning and it's just going crazy, and it's pretty much knocking anybody out the way that is in its way. We're going to look at a little bit about machine guards. Machine guards and types. I apologize, y'all. Something is not operating right here. But there are 4 general types of guards that we do have, and one is fixed. Another one is interlocked, adjustable, and self-adjusting. Then also we have point of operation guards, in-running point guards, and flying chips and spark guards, and we'll get into these briefly. So fixed guards, fixed are typically permanent guards of a machine. These guards are preferable because they're simple. Basically, all we're saying is fixed in this particular case, where as you can see, we have an in-running machine. Yeah, so these fixed guards are just standard shields that are in place. So typically, if you think of any kind of machine that's dealing with chains and gears, there's typically a guard that is be permanently fixed in place. And typically, you would have to move this guard in order to get to the device or the machine itself. We also have interlock guards. Interlock guards you can think of like your home dryer or washing machine. So basically like your dryer. If you throw clothes into the dryer and it's moving, but maybe you forgot to throw something in the dryer, you can open up the dryer easily and the machine will stop running. And this is a toner wash that is here present at UT Health in one of our buildings. And one of the main things I asked is what type of safety measures does he have for this machine? And so he did show me that we do have, or that they do have interlock guards on these particular machines. We have self-adjusting guards. Self-adjusting is, as you can see at the top, the chamber side itself. He doesn't have to move the guard himself. He can just easily slice and cut, and the machine will self-adjust the guard to where it needs to be. At the bottom, we have what they call adjustable. Adjustable is just something you would have to manually adjust yourself. And I do remember playing with one of these as a little child and kind of nipped myself because I didn't have any clue to adjust this thing the way he's doing it at the bottom. Also, we have what you call it, in-running, well, operation guards or operation or point of operation. The point of operation is just basically where the machine is being operated and where the work is being done for human operations. And so here we have the machines, and this is just showing you where the point of operations are. Now, in-running point guards, as we talked about earlier, these are the machines that can cause nip points. These are where you can easily see a man's hands or fingers or anything can get trapped in the gears. And so once again, this young lady here who is trying to do some cooking or so, but she's playing around and then her fingers get caught into these in-running points. And so typically we provide a permanent shield or something like that for machines of that nature. Flying chips and spark guards. So of course for flying chips, you want to wear some type of PPE or some type of shield. Now this saw, as you see, has a type of shield that is over it so that the sparks fly in a certain direction and does not pop back up in his face. And of course, always we want to make sure that we are wearing some kind of protective eye gear when we are dealing with sparks. Now we're going to look at safety devices, which can stop the machine or restrain or withdraw or require operator to use both hands to use or provide some type of barrier. So some of the devices that are used here is what we call a presence sensor device. And so this is a type of machine that basically, as you can see in the illustration here, there are lasers that are in place. And so once the laser senses any kind of motion or anybody's hand or anything coming in, it will automatically stop the machine so that he can do what he needs to do. So for example, here's a guy testing out the machine. I'm sorry, y'all, there's some issues I'm having here. So as you can see, as the machine is moving, the young man will put his hand in place and it will stop the machine once he sticks his hand into the laser area. Another one that we have is what we would call safety mats. Safety mats are a type of use where there is a machine, but it is designed in such a way that anybody, once they walk onto the safety mat, once they get in within a certain area of this machine, the machine will automatically cut off. And as you can see in the illustration, it's calling out what they call a work area, or a safe area, or a safe zone. And as you can see, once he stands in a particular area, the machine will still move. But once he gets into closer to the area, the machine eventually will stop and allow any individual to come in and work on the machine as needed. Next, we're dealing with our trips. Now, trips are little trip wires, and what trip wires are designed to do is to basically, if there is a machine that is running, the protective measure is just to be able to stop that machine in the event something happens. So once again, if somebody is working around the machine or their chain or necklace gets caught in some kind of form or fashion, they can hit this wire and it will stop the machine from running. Another one is what they call a saw stop. And a saw stop device basically is just a situation where it detects flesh. So the moment any type of flesh or anything comes about, that saw will stop, and as you can see, it'll cease to work, or even bring the blade down so the individual will not nip their fingers off any of the other body parts. Another one we have is what we call a restraint and a pullback. Now, what this allows a worker to do is, because we have machines that does punctures, sometimes people's hands can get caught in these punctures, and so what they allow is a pullback device. And with that pullback device, as you can see, they have these little shackles that are tied around the ankles. And so once he presses a machine for the device to come down and shear or smash whatever is needed, it'll automatically pull his hands back so that his hands will not be caught into the machine to get pressed or damaged or even sheared off. And once again, when you have time, you can go and look at the rest of the video just to see more different examples or different areas of these machine pullbacks. Also, what we have is a puncture device machine. Now, what is happening here is it's another little device. So basically, you see this little ring that comes down. And what that ring is doing is basically it comes down to detect if there's any kind of finger or anything in the way first before the machine comes down. So you see him, when he sticks his finger in place, the machine does not work. But once he removes his finger, the machine will continue to operate. We have what we call a two-hand control device. And a two-hand control device machine means that both buttons have to be pressed at the same time for that machine to work. And so we see the demonstration here. He's working on the machine and he has to simultaneously press both buttons at the same time for the machine to operate. Now, we have fixed barrier guards or interlock barrier guards, but once again, these type of guards are designed for these robotic arms, these moving appendages, or these articulated motion devices here. And just an example, just to show the importance of having these type of guards. This is a shop somewhere where you can see these moving appendages, but there's no guards and no barriers around. So this person ends up getting trapped by one of the machines. And you can tell automatically there doesn't appear to be any kind of safety devices. They're having to work to try to stop the machine. So these are kind of areas that we want to provide some kind of protection so that nobody has to get injured. And just in a second, you see these two guys at the bottom screen try to come out and help, but they also get trapped by one of these articulated motions. So one of the most important things we can do is to provide a type of barrier to keep people away or out of the area and keep them in a safe zone. So just a little game for y'all to play. So based on watch these videos, the question I would ask is, what would you call this type of guard here on this particular machine? And of course, as anybody guess right, this will be considered a fixed barrier. And then of course, this type here, we have the lasers in front. That would be called a sensing device. This one here, we can see a shield is in place, but once it moves or once it opens, the machine stops. So we call that an interlock guard. Then the last one we have kind of the big hint, we have the two arrows coming down, and this would be a two-hand motion, or basically both buttons have to be pressed at the same time. So once again, we just have another little illustration. Here's a man using a machine. As you can see, he has no PPE on or anything to protect himself. The machine doesn't appear to be guarded. So just again for yourself, what do you believe needs to be done in this situation for this man to be protected? And as you see now, he has on his goggles, he has on his safety shoes, and he has on the safety lab coat. And then also he has a little barrier around the machine to keep those flying particles from flying out. So some OSHA safety work practices. Number one is just to keep safeguard affixed to secure to the machine. So you want to make sure that the guards that are guarding the machine are working correctly. So before you pick up any tool, make sure that we're looking and inspect the machine and make sure that it's safe for use. Number two, we don't want to allow guards or falling objects to create any kind of pinch point or hazards or anything like that. So we always want to be shielded from these type of situations. Number three, if there is a problem with the guard, please stop the operation and promptly tell your supervisor that something is wrong. Don't try to continue and just try to feel like you'll make it out anyhow. Another one is one of my ones I like to always tell people. Number four, please never leave the work area while parts are moving. Because dangerous things can happen. You can see here, nobody's around and this belt pops off and just whips right across the room. Number five, unfortunately, we were not going to be able to get to that today. One of our other colleagues was going to do a little presentation about lockout and tag out, but just showing the importance of ensuring that anytime any kind of equipment is being operated on, that those machines are turned off and locked out and tagged out. Number six, want to make sure that we sorry, y'all, I apologize. Number six, we want to make sure that all machines are lubricated. Number seven, only operate the machine with guards in place. Please use alternate guarding methods if needed. So, for example, here, we have a young man operating a machine. There's no shield, and he has no kind of safety shield on. So whatever machine you're using, you have to be able to look at it, evaluate, and take whatever kind of measures you believe needs to be taken to protect yourself. Number eight, do not operate a machine if the guards are damaged or missing. As we have a picture here, here's a man standing in front of a kind of a grinder or so in the background, and all basically he has to do is sneeze, and if his head pops back, he is in some serious trouble. Number nine, once again, we want to make sure that jewelry, shirts, hair, or anything that is loose, make sure that all of that is tied back and make sure you don't have any of this kind of items on, because once again, this can cause some serious issues. Even here, poor little mother here is just trying to make some cookies or something, but she's not paying attention and her hair gets caught right up into the grime. And number 10 also is one of my favorites. If you are unfamiliar with the machine, please, by any means, just stop and go get somebody that is familiar. Do not try to operate it or figure it out on your own if you don't have the understanding of how that machine operates. So always want to stay sober and stay woke. And we're just going to get to the end here because we're a little bit out of time. We just want to make sure that all machines are working properly and making sure that they're properly guarded. And we just want to make sure employees are trained on what to do in certain situations. And we just want to make sure that, of course, anything that is not working, make sure that you let your supervisor know that the machine is not in place. And so that's just about a summary. We've gone through a little bit of history of why OSHA decided to present itself as a safety measures to help workers to be able to get home safely. We understand that certain measures were implemented, certain machine guarding and lockout, tag outs, and other, as you heard previous presentations. These are all these things that put in place so that at least everybody can go to a workplace feeling safe, and hopefully we'll be able to get back home safely. Without that, that shall be the end of machine guarding. Are there any questions from anybody? And I apologize again that we have to kind of go through it quickly.
Darris, thank you very much appreciate it. And sorry about the tech issues as you went through the presentation. This is a really slick presentation, and I know you put a ton of time and effort into this one. I've seen it delivered without the tech issues, and it's excellent. It still was excellent, but again, apologies everybody for the tech issues. Any questions or discussion items before we end today's session?
We will have lockout, tag out also on the asynchronous learning. We weren't able to cover today, but we will have it available.
Excellent. Thanks, guys. So we were able to cover risk management and insurance, fire and life safety basics, and occupational safety basics today. All of the content is on our Canvas site, and you'll be able to go through the additional presentations in the asynchronous folder. As you go through that material, don't forget to add any questions or discussion items to the Canvas website. We'll be checking that throughout the week. Next week, when we get together next Monday at 9 a.m. Central Standard Time, Snehal and Bryan will be present for the first 15 minutes, so we can talk about any of these presentations that we went over so far this week and any of the asynchronous materials. If you guys have any questions or other issues in the meantime, just let us know. You can drop your comments and questions into the Canvas site. You're always welcome to contact me directly as well. Guys, thank you so much for your time, and see a couple of other things coming into the chat, just making sure. Can we share the materials with our coworkers? By all means, please do. These materials are here for you guys to use and make your own. And if we can share anything else with you, let us know. Guys, thanks so much. Have a good week and be safe.